Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Bat Cave. It is Monday, 11/3/2025, and I want to talk about something I've been researching this weekend. It turns out that the Jews retook Goshen after Joshua's conquest, and I've been doing research this weekend and writing on the Avaris, or I'm sorry, the Sea Peoples and the Danites and all their basically adventures and conquests. And what it turns out is that the reason the Danites get going so quickly with their ships is because they retake Avaris down here. And then at the same time they're going up here, you see, let's see, this is from the Amanra period, just so you know. These are all the references to the Haparu all around. If you see these red dots, people are complaining, reporting being invaded by the Haparu. They're also reporting being threatened by the Haparu wherever you see these red dots. So Hazor is Egypt's basically main point of connection, kind of from the Philistine territories to Hazor and then to Damascus. And so you see all of this. These are places that are reporting the Haparu. And this is Sumer. This is where the Zemarites would still have a city, the same ones who became the Sumerians. And then this is Hazor. This is the city that is burned under Joshua, and then it apparently gets reoccupied in the next generation. And then it's going to be ruled by King Jabin when you have the war with Deborah and Barak. And this Hazor, it's during this period that Hazor is warning about being threatened by Jerusalem. And of course, all these other cities are threatened by Jerusalem. They're reporting on the Haparu, kind of moving in and stealing stuff. And they're trying to get Egypt to come out of Egypt to help them against the Haparu, right? Well, the reason they're appealing to Egypt for help is because back when the Egyptians were strong, before getting decimated by Yahweh under Moses, they pretty much had, these were all vassals to them. Not necessarily every last city reported to them and paid taxes to them, but the major cities along the trade route between here to Carchemish did. And so Egypt could come up with their chariot armies and stuff like this and basically kick the crap out of anybody who tried to block this trade, essentially. And so when they're getting overrun by the Habarus, they're appealing to Egypt for help. Well, Egypt's weak, and Egypt is not coming to help them. And this is going to be in the days of, I forget his name, but it's Akhenaten's dad. Akhenaten is the one who tries to turn it back to monotheism. And this is going to be roughly around the turn of the 14th century. So think late 13, or I should say, low numbers, 1300s, going over to the 1200s BCE. And it's going to be 1275 that, if you see Kadesh up here, Ramses II is going to have the Battle of Kadesh. Well, I just got done reading the inscriptions of the Battle of Kadesh. And now, mind you have Kadesh right here, and then you want to remember Tyre. All this region up here is being sacked by Dan and Asher, okay? But Dan is going to be leaving on boats. Asher is going to maintain the land, but the Danites are basically down here, and here's Dan. And this whole domain up here would be called the dwelling of the Danites, because it's their capital city that is ultimately going to be the projection point from which they go north and conquer all these cities. They're going to burn Byblos and Ugarit way up here. And so this is the dwelling of the Danites. This is one of the places called the dwelling of the Danites. Well, how you would say dwelling of the Danites in Hebrew is Dardana. Okay, this is important. When you read the Kadesh inscription, this is Ramses II's battle against the Hittites in Kadesh, he talks about two Hebrew peoples being with him. One is he talks about the Dardani. That's the settlements of the Danites, and that's where they're called when they settle in lands, because they call the land the settlement of the Danites, Dardani, because remember, the Danite territory in Israel is down here. Everything else is a colony. So their colonies they call Dardani, settlement of the Danites, or the Danite colony, essentially is what it is. And so these other people call the people of the Danite colonies Dardani, if they don't know that it's really Dani, okay? Or Danium, okay? So Dani is kind of like the adjective form Danite, where Danites plural is Danium, okay? The other people Pharaoh mentions being aligned against him with the Hittites is the people of Caleb, which is important because the main body of the Judahites are down here in Hebron, and the one who takes that land is Caleb. Not only is the one who takes that land Caleb, but the main three sons of Judah that are going to basically be reckoned in the Book of Chronicles, one of their names is Caleb. So you have Caleb that's like a descendant of Caleb, but it's a famous name, and it's a name of basically a third of the Judahites. They would be Calebites, or Calebi, okay? And so he mentions the people of Caleb, Khaleb, which is exactly how, like, if you look at Caleb here, and it talks about Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, he's going to take the land of Hebron and slay the Nephilim there. You see it's pronounced Kaleb, okay? KH, there's in Hebrew, there's a K and a KH sound, basically. They're going to be the same letter, but it's going to have a little mark on it, and one is K and KH. So the Egyptians are literally spelling it the exact same way the Jews are spelling it, Khaleb, okay? So he's basically accounting Judahites and Danites as being involved in this battle of Kadesh, and he's saying that they're on the side of the Hittites. Now, he's not necessarily saying they're Hittite mercenaries or anything like that. He's just talking about all the people whose butts he kicked when he gets back to Egypt. And he's probably exaggerating, but what we find from Manetho, and Manetho's records are all jacked up, but you can kind of piece it together, is that the Israelites came back here after this. They reoccupied Goshen. I'm going to show you in the Bible where it says it 3 times. And then they're going to stay there for like another 100 years. And so after Joshua, they're going to hold on to this for like another 100 years. They're going to come back. And then it's from here that the Danites are first starting to sail to Crete and Cyprus and stuff like this as they're conquering up here. And so they're going to be in Avaris. And what's going to happen is that Ramses II is going to drive them out. And it's after he drives them out that they start gathering all their seafaring allies, and they regroup in Libya over here. Okay, so they're driven out of here. Remember, he's going to say this battle of Kadesh is him driving out the Hebrews or the Hyksos from Avaris, which is eastern Egypt over here, and it says how he chased them all the way to Syria. Okay. Well, the Egyptian army is coming up out of Syria, and they're heading up here, and the Hittites have vassals all the way down here. So the Hittites are going to see this and be like, they got news that a huge Egyptian army is moving out of Egypt and is coming all the way up here. So the Hittites bring their army down here towards where their vassals are, thinking Egypt's going to try to take over their vassals. Well, they may have, but they're mostly involved with chasing out the Hyksos. And this is going to occur. All this stuff is going to add up. It's going to ultimately be completed by the days of Ramses III, and that's the last time you get the report of the Sea Peoples. What the Sea Peoples are is basically it's the Danites and all of their allies all over the Mediterranean that are trading at Avaris, because it's basically the collapsing Minoan civilization. And when they get kicked out of here, they jump on their ships. They don't just go out by land and let the Egyptians chase them and kill them. They go out by their ships. And then they regather, and that's when they start raiding all over the place by ships. And then they get so good at it, that's when they take this island of Adana, which is going to be around the days of Samson, and they're going to invade Cyprus and take it. But they're going to essentially form a kingdom right down here under Mopsus, which is called, I think it's called like Havana or something like this. But their capital city is called Adana, okay? Then they're going to be up here around Troy, and they're going to be called, it's going to be called Dardana again. So he calls this Dardani, Pharaoh does, but there's going to be a Dardana over here, which means settlement of the Danites. And then they're going to be up in Crete, and then they're going to be, that's not going to show up on this map. And effectively, everywhere the Danites are, they're going to have the city of Thebes right here. The city of Tyre seems to be people from Tyre because they're allied with the Danites. Troy seems to be related to Tyre, and that's why Dardana is right here. So you see you got Dardanians right here. And then the city of Argos, which is right by Tyrans. You can't see that here. The city of Knossos down here is Crete. And then, and then the city of Mycenae right here. So these three, plus Argos, which is right over here, plus Crete, are all Danite cities. And they say that. The Greeks say these cities were founded by people called the Danans. Okay, so it's spelled Danaaans. Well, the reason it's spelled like this is because the Greeks don't have a letter Y that they use in the middle of words and stuff like this. They're not going to end a word with Y. They're not going to use a Y the same way we use a Y. They're going to use a Y to represent the letter U, how we would represent U. So when you see the people of Lud in Eastern Anatolia or Western Anatolia, the Hittites are calling them Luwians because for some reason they can't pronounce consonants mid-word. And they're actually Ludians. But the Greeks are going to spell that Lydians with a Y, and people think it's pronounced in the English way, Lydians. It's actually Ludians. Like the word, if there's a Y in the middle of a word, it's pronounced U, not E. Okay, so Lydians is not Lydians, it's Ludians. Okay, and that was the normal way of pronouncing it. And of course, the Bible says that Lud is the youngest son of Shem, and he lives over here. And he's going to get, conquered somewhat by the Hittites, and then the language is going to be called Luwian because it's going to be a mix of these things, and it's going to have Semitic, it's going to have a Japhethetic structure, but it's going to have Luwian words in it. And there's the Hittite and the Luwian languages are interrelated because there's hundreds of years after the Tower of Babel where these two are living side by side. So it's called, they're borrowing words from each other essentially. So the Danites are basically have kingdoms down here. They're going to have kingdoms down here, or at least turf down here. And their main kingdom is going to be over here. So Saul, where he is in Tarsus, there's a city next to it called Mopsuestia. And Mopsuestia is run by this king Mopsus, who's of the Denyen, or the Danunan, who is right over here. Okay? And then they're going to have a little island called Adana, where they have basically this island set up to build at one time like 270 ships. So it's basically a massive shipbuilding operation right here because they're going to invade this. And then, of course, when you're in the Deborah, she's going to talk about how the Danites wouldn't get off their ships and the Asherites abode in their breaches. In other words, here's the land of Asher right over here, and the Danites are basically on their ships, and their breaches or their slips where the ships would dock were all in Asher. And so they're saying the Asherites and Danites are too busy with the seafaring operation to help us in the battle against Hazor down here, okay? Well, the reason is because they're in the phase of conquering all this stuff. So they're conquering Cyprus, they're conquering southern Turkey, they're conquering Greece and Crete, they're conquering western Turkey, and the Sea Peoples are also fighting. You see 1175 BCE, they're trying to get back Avaris because they've been driven out by Ramses II, and this in 1175 is Ramses III finally defeating them, and they don't try anymore. And so after they fail here, they're literally Danites, they're called the Denyen, the Palesti, the Philistines, and then a bunch of allies of theirs that are going to come from Sicily and Sardinia over here. They're going to come from Lucca or Lycia, which is right here. They're going to come from Tajeker, which I forget where they are, but they end up settling in Dor. That's apparently pretty well documented. And all these people are going to end up settling in Phoenicia, a lot of them in Philistia. And then, of course, the Danites are going to settle, where the Danites are. And so what you end up with is Danites all over here. But we're going to look at the Bible and show you where it just flat out tells you they went back and took Goshen under Joshua. So if you just get into your Power Bible or whatever Bible software you have and you look at Goshen, notice you see in Genesis 45 is the first mention of it when they're given Goshen by Pharaoh. It's called the land of Goshen, okay? So if you look at that in the interlinear, it's good. It's the Eretz Goshen, okay? The Eretz Goshen. That's the land or the earth of Goshen, okay? So again, it's just called Goshen or the land of Goshen, okay? Goshen, Eretz of Goshen. That's Genesis 46. Eretz of Goshen, Genesis 46. Eretz of Goshen, Genesis 47. Eretz of Goshen, Genesis 47:6, 47:27. Eretz of Goshen, Genesis 50. Eretz of Goshen, Exodus 8:22. Eretz of Goshen, Exodus 9:26. Eretz of Goshen. Okay. So here's the point. Number one, nobody has a place in Israel that they can say, we think this is Goshen. No historian, no archaeologist, nobody, okay? So why in Joshua 10, this is what it says. This is when Joshua fights the 5 kings. They make peace with the people of Gibeon, and because they make peace with them, Adonizedek gathers the 5 most powerful kings in basically southern Israel against them, these Canaanite kings. And he kicks all their butts, and then listen to what he says to this, okay? He says, and Joshua returned, and all Israel with him to Debir. So let's find Debir. And this is where one of the kings are. So you see this is in the southern Judean highlands, okay? Like any further south of this, you're heading towards the Negev. And it says, and he fought against it, and he took it, and the king thereof, and the cities thereof, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, and utterly destroyed all the souls that were in, and he left nothing remaining. As he had done to Hebron, so he did to Debir. So Hebron is right here. So he's going south. And where they start this war is they start the war in Gibeon because Gibeon made peace with them. And they're starting the war to defend Gibeon. And so it says, after they defeat Jericho and Ai, then they make this peace with the Gibeonites because the Gibeonites pretend to be from far away. They're basically defending Gibeon because these 5 kings are going to destroy Gibeon because they've allied with the Israelites, okay? So they start up in Gibeon, which is, if you see Bethlehem up here, and if you go a little bit further up, you're going to be up. Actually, let's go. Here's Gibeon up here. And notice here's Gibeon right here, and here's Jebus right here, which is Jerusalem, okay? So they start up going up from Jericho, which is just down here, just down this road here. And then they go up and take Ai, which is right here. And now they're right here at Gibeon defending the city, okay? And that's where the battle starts. But what they're doing is they're chasing these guys out of the area, chasing them to their cities, and then chasing them everywhere they flee, and they're killing them, okay? So he goes to Gibeon, and from Gibeon now, right after this, we got him all the way down to Debir. So you can tell they're really moving. Here's Gibeon up here. Here's Debir down here. That's where they are, okay? So you're talking about a space of like 50 miles or whatever. They've chased these cities down, but they're also destroying every stronghold they try to get into. So every city they try to hole up in to try to defend themselves, they're destroying those cities too. And then it says, as he had also done to Libnah, and also to the king, and Joshua smote all the countries of the hills, this is important, of the hills, this is the hills, and to the south, and of the south. So the term for the south is the Negev, or the Negev, okay? So the Negev is all this country down here. It's not as many cities, it's much more sparsely populated, but it's all the countries down here, which is basically the whole southern border of Israel, okay? So pay attention to what he does. He says, all the countries of the Negev, and this term is, and of the valley, and of the slopes, okay? This King James says springs. It's the only translations that says this. It's the slopes. So in other words, it's basically saying all the slopes around the highlands and all the lowlands, the valley, okay? He left none remained, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God commanded. So what is he saying? he's saying he wipes out all of this, okay? This is the fortified stronghold. This is the main part they're getting. But afterwards, they're chasing these kings out to everywhere they're going with their armies, and wherever they go in the valleys, they're wiping them out. Remember, Joshua is going to conquer for 20 years, okay? 20 years of warfare Joshua's conquering for. So they're just summarizing everything that happens. The main battles happen right away, but by the end, they're going to list all the kings he's killed, and it's like 30-some kings. And then it's going to list all the lands he's taken. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cities they've taken, okay? So then it says, and then Joshua smote them from Kadesh Barnea and even unto Gaza, and all the country of Goshen, even unto Gibeon. Okay, now why Goshen to Gibeon? Because Gibeon is where this particular phase of the conquest started. It starts with Gibeon, but it takes them to Goshen. So what they're really doing is Kadesh Barnea to Gaza is this. He's literally explaining Kadesh Barnea is where they first were going to go into the promised land. It's outside of Israel. So if you see Kadesh Barnea right here, it's in the wilderness of Paran. This is where people believe they are. It's probably closer to Mount Sinai, so it could be down here. But the point is, it's way over here to Gaza. And so what they're doing is, it's literally, people put Kadesh Barnea right here because they think Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Peninsula. It's not. It's in Jabir al-Lawz. So it's literally pointing to the southernmost tip of the Israelite territory, all the way to the westernmost tip. That's Gaza, okay? Then it's pointing from Gibeon, which is right here north of Jerusalem, down to Goshen. That's this north-south. So it's like from here east to west, and from here north to south. He took it all. That's what he's saying, okay? So he says again, the country of Goshen. I don't know why the King James will like arbitrarily pick different words like this, but it does it all the time. It's the same thing. It is the Eretz of Goshen, the land of Goshen. So I don't know why. Literally, you look at every other translation, it says land of Goshen. You look at every other use of these terms in the King James, it says land of Goshen. And then here it decides to say country of Goshen. Why? Because these people are assuming this is some unknown Goshen that's up here in the Judean highlands somewhere, even though they can't find it, when it's really the land of Goshen. Now check this out. We don't have one witness to this. We have 3 witnesses to this. Genesis 11. This is the same thing. As the Lord God commanded Moses' servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of the Lord that commanded Moses. So Joshua took all that land, the hills and the south country, so the hills and the Negev, so in other words, the highlands and the Negev, and all the land of Goshen, that's over here, and the valley and the plain, and the mountain of Israel and the valley of the same. So the mountain of Israel is all the highlands up here and the valley of the same. So in other words, he's talking about the mountain and the valley of, like, they're being very thorough that he's gotten all the land of Israel plus Goshen. You notice they're not naming any other lands. He's talking about all this part of Israel. The south country is the Negev and all the land of Goshen. So it wouldn't say this if the land of Goshen was just in all this other spaces, because they're covering the hills, the Negev, which is basically the wilderness, the desert, the valley and the plain, which is the valleys are all around the mountains, the mountain of Israel and the valley of the same. So the mountain of Israel is probably talking about the highlands of Ephraim, plus the valleys all around it. Okay, so we've gotten all this and the land of Goshen. So they went back and took Goshen. Okay. Even from the Mount Halak that goes up to Seir. Now remember, the other one goes basically from Gibeon, because that part of the battle starts at Gibeon and it's all the way down to Goshen, and it's from Kadesh Barnea all the way over to Gaza. So in other words, they've chased these armies southwest and gone everywhere around here and burned all the cities and scattered everyone who's here. Okay. And then it says, well, the reason they're fleeing to Goshen is because Goshen is unoccupied. Remember, the Jews just left it 40 years ago. It's gone. There's nothing there. And it's not like the Egyptians are trying to resettle it. Their country was just decimated by God 40 years ago. It was just really wrecked by God 40 years prior. So it's not like they're like, oh yeah, we've just re-expanded our population. They lost all their firstborn sons, plus tons of cattle, plus tons of crops, plus their armies. They have been decimated. So they're not just like 40 years later ready to go reoccupy every place that the Jews left. And the Jews were a huge people. And we look at it, they're almost half the population of the Egyptians. They're a huge people. Remember, the Egyptians are practicing abortion. The Jews are multiplying like rabbits. Okay? They're not some like, people want to imagine, because your secular archaeologists want to worship Egyptian archaeology and just totally crap on Hebrew archaeology. And they want to imagine that like the Israelites were this just tiny little scattered ragtag group of, Bedouins, and then that the Egyptians were this massive untouchable civilization. Well, history doesn't tell us that. Egypt's own history doesn't tell us that. Archaeology doesn't tell us that. The Bible doesn't tell us that. It tells us that they were two peoples who were about the same size because the Egyptians are practicing abortion and birth control, and the Jews are multiplying like rabbits. And also they have the money. And also they have the trade relationships. And also they're going outside of Egypt to find their wives, which means they're bringing in more people, not just multiplying within the people, which means their women in Egypt are being married off to Egyptians, and they're Egyptians with wealth and power. They're not sitting here marrying off their daughters to any good-looking young Egyptian who comes a-courting. They're marrying off their daughters to people who can advance them in power with the Egyptian nobility, because they are the nobility that is working alongside the Pharaoh to govern Egypt for 100 years. Okay? And it just so happens one of those guys who's going to be the tops in doing it is Dan, because he only has one son when he enters into Egypt, which means he's got a bunch of daughters. Which means the Danites are going to link up with the Egyptians right away, and those are going to be the Egyptians of Copt, or the Giptos, and they're going to occupy Crete, or what the Egyptians call Kift, which is based on Copt, and then they're going to go start these 4 cities. And when you read about this stuff, the Greeks have this in their record, and they talk about these mythological 2 brothers, Danaus and Aegyptus, and it's literally the Danites and the Copts, okay? What the Greeks will do again and again and again is they will make up a story about some guy named, like let's say they have a city called Athena or called Athens, right? They're going to make up the god Athena to explain where Athens came from. Oh, there was this god or goddess named whatever the name of the city is, or the sea, or whatever the people are, and they just endlessly do this. And this is why you have so many different versions of the Greek gods and so many different versions of their myths about them, because like whenever they don't know the name of a city or whatever it came from, because they don't have any written history, they don't have written history until the 8th century BCE. So when Homer comes up with this, he's literally making up the story of Helen of Troy about this woman who got 1,000 ships to sail at sea. No, she didn't. Those 1,000 ships that sailed to sea is the Danites and what they had been doing for like 100 years before the Trojan War. And Troy is just one of the cities that they're going to sack, because Troy is the main place where tin is going to the Hittites, and the Hittites are one of their main rivals because they're trying to support the Canaanites up here. You see where the Hittites are? So the Hittites are reinforcing the Canaanites up here that the Danites and the Asherites are fighting against. So they're going to take out Troy, which is the main source that they get tin, which is how they make bronze. The Danites are smart. They know if you don't have the stuff you need to make the weapons, you're not going to do very well. If you don't have the rare earth minerals, right, you can't make your freaking homing devices for your missiles. Boom. So we will win if we can block you from getting your rare earth minerals. It's the same thing back then. If we can block you from getting tin, good luck fighting us with copper swords. These things are going to fall apart, right? And so the Danites are going to go all the way to Ireland, where the Tuatha De Danann are. Literally, Tuatha De Danann in Celtic means tribe of Dan. In Sardinian, De means of. It doesn't mean god or goddess. It means of, okay? And the Danann, the Tuatha De Danann, it's spelled one letter different. It has 2 N's instead of 2 A's. The Tuatha De Danann is the same thing as the people of Danann, which is what the Greeks call them. They call them the Danann or the Danoi, okay? Well, Danann and Danoi, it's Dan-A-N, is the exact same thing the Egyptians call them. They call them the Dan-Yen. And because the Greeks don't have an A in the middle of the word, or a Y in the middle of their word, they have a Dan-A-N, Dan-A-N, Dan-E-N, okay? And then Danoi, that in Hebrew they're called Dani, Okay, that's the adjective form of Danite is Dani. So they say Denoi and Danian. And the Hebrews say Daniim and Dani. Okay, so it's the same thing. And then the only other difference is in Egyptian, remember, these guys are interacting with the Egyptians and trading with them. The letter in their alphabet for an N is the same letter. It looks the exact same. It's like a wavy, watery line as the Hebrew letter M. So in the Hebrew, it's Daniim. In Israel, it's Danyin because it's just the same letter and it's, eventually going to be pronounced, right? So it's everything you need to know is just easily explicable by just understanding the linguistics of these people and then just accepting that the Danites are the Danites. The Danyan and the Danuna and the Danoi, they're the Danites. And once you understand that, it's like, wait a minute. If you do the math and when Deborah and Barak does this, and I've been working on these charts and trying to make them clear, the Deborah and Barak thing, the end of their peace, so you see it's 20 years of bondage, and then they set them 3 and then 40 years of peace, and then the end of that 40 years of peace takes you to 1170. The Trojan War took place between 1190 and 1180. So it's literally when she's saying the Danites won't get off their ships, it's 10 years before the Trojan War and all these ships sail to Troy and destroy it. It's not a coincidence. The Danites are going wrecking stuff all over the eastern Mediterranean. Remember how I told you the Sea Peoples are finally defeated by the Egyptians in 1175. So it's near the end of this peace. They start kicking them out in 1275. That's Ramses II. So it's Ramses III that finally defeats them. And when you look at the Sea Peoples, this is so easy to understand if you figure this out, okay? When you look at the Sea Peoples, here's the lists of the Sea Peoples from 1210, that's Ramses II. It should be 1275 because the War of Kadesh was 1274. So I don't know why they've got 1210 here. So it's really 1274 to it's 1175. These numbers are off because Ramses III is 1175. And notice the names of these people. I don't know who Karkisha is, but Luca is Lycia, Sheridan is Sardinia, Ekwesh is the Egyptian name for Achaeans. Okay? Well, I figured out who the Achaeans are. Achaeans are another name for Danites, or the Greeks and the Danites that are mixed together. And the reason they call them that is because the first people to call them this, now remember, when we're in the Amonra period, and I want to show you guys this, notice the Amonra period is the period before the Sea Peoples, okay? They're getting letters from all these people, but this library, this Amonra library, all these other places here is showing you everywhere the Amonra library is getting letters from, and then every one of them then is mentioning the Haparu. So when you understand, like, that's your baseline, they're getting letters from here. This is Kassite Babylon. Notice it says they've got 11 letters from there. They've got 2 letters from Assyria. They've got 14 letters from the Mitanni kingdom. They've got 4 letters from the Hittites. And then they've got this Arzawa is another, I think it's like a Luwian city or a Luwian territory, but it's just beneath Troy and the Dardania. And then they're getting letters from Elisha. 5 letters, it looks like, from Elisha. This is Cyprus. And then all these letters they're getting from Canaan, okay? These are all letters that are going to the pharaohs from their different diplomatic allies, okay? And what they find is this is how many letters, when you see the number 5 here and the number 0 here, that's how many letters they have, and this is how many of them mention the Danites. Or mention, I'm sorry, the Haparu, the Hebrews, okay? So all these ones in red are reporting the Hebrew. And if you see all these like highlighted, darkened letters here, I believe these are all the ones that are reporting the Hebrew. So 64 of these 293 letters they have are reporting the Hebrew, okay? And the point they're making is the Hebrew are not reported in any of these other places, but they're reported all over Canaan. Why? Because the Hebrews are invading and taking over. This is simple, okay? The point is, we know the Egyptians have diplomatic contacts all over here, okay? So remember, Right now, we're at the close of the Minoan civilization. The Minoan is there. Nobody is called the Minoans. There's a legendary King Minos. They're all legendary, okay? And then some guy in like the 18th century names it the Minoan civilization because it's just like he wants to put a designation of this Cretan civilization that existed before it was overthrown by the Achaean civilization, and then the Achaean civilization is going to last till the end of the Bronze Age collapse, which is shortly after the destruction of Troy. So something happens that causes the Bronze Age to collapse. This is what they're saying. Well, the Bronze Age doesn't collapse. What really happens is the tin that would normally go to the Hittites and the Egyptians is going to go here now. We have this. We have chemical records of tin that came from England ending up in Haifa. We have it on shipwrecks off of Haifa. So we know these ships are going to keep coming with this tin, and occasionally a ship's going to sink because of a storm or something. And what we find is ships that are off of the coast of Haifa that we have tin from 1300 BCE, this is when they start, to 900 BCE. And that's around the time of David's kingdom. Well, what happens in 900 BCE? The answer is they start making iron weapons. Because these guys are making iron weapons. See, the Philistines are one of the first people they cut off from tin, and so the Philistines have to come up with new weapons. Without bronze weapons, they're stuck fighting with sticks and stones, and they're going to get their butts kicked. And so they start forging iron weapons, and the Philistines are really the ones who began the Iron Age. And so the Philistines come up with iron weapons. They had iron chariots. Like, you had iron. It's been around since before the flood, but it takes a lot more time and effort to forge. Whereas like bronze, you can make a campfire and you can heat up your sword and sharpen it, and you can make bronze weapons from a campfire, basically. So they're forging iron here, and after the Philistines start forging iron, they start pulling weight against the Jews again. And it talks about how the Jews have to go down to the Philistines to have any of their weapons forged, because the Philistines won't let them have any forges by the time they get dominance over them. And it's Samson and David and Saul and these guys that are going to defeat the Philistines. And by the time you get to David's kingdom, we're in the late 9th century. I think his kingdom starts in like 960. So surprise, surprise, once they start making iron weapons like the Philistines, you stop having this market for all this tin to come from England, and it stops coming here. And where does it go? It goes to the Celts. It stops coming here, and it starts going to the Celts up in the north it's pretty much they come from the area of Czechoslovakia. It's basically people who are Celtic people who are sons of Magog who are merged with Thracian people. And that's why they're descended from the same people as the Mongols, but they have blonde and red hair and blue eyes and freckles, okay? Because they're mating with the same Thracian peoples that the Danites are mating with to become the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norse people. The Thracians are where you get the blonde hair, blue eye from. So I want to show you. So I just showed you in the Bible where it says they took Goshen. Now I'm going to show you in Manetho where it says they retook Goshen. Okay. Now Manetho is notoriously bad for not knowing the surrounding history of the era. Okay. Remember, the Egyptians have all these records, but the Hittites have been gone. By the time Manetho writes, the Hittites have been gone for 1,000 years. There's no trace of their kingdom. They're not going to get proven outside of the Bible until the 1970s, okay? And so he doesn't know who the Hittites are, and he thinks because the main big rival to Egypt in his day and for centuries before him has been the Assyrians, he thinks anything that's related to Hittites is just another name for the Assyrians. And so he's going to talk about how that he goes up and fights the Assyrians, and they're threatened by the Assyrians, and the Jews are scared of the Assyrians and all this stuff, when the Assyrians are a tiny little kingdom at this point. Like they're not, I mean, look at, here's Assyria. This is all the turf they control. The Mitanni are the main ones that the Egyptians are treating with, and the Jews are getting their wives from. And the Hittites are all over here, and they're a lot bigger too. By this time, they've taken all this land from the Mitanni too. And the Mitanni are eventually going to dissolve to the Hittites, the Kassites, and the Assyrians. They're just going to dissolve their land, okay? And then Assyria is going to start to grow really in the days of Solomon. Like they're not even a threat to Israel until you get into the days of like Elisha. Then they start to get to the point where they're coming over the Euphrates and actually starting to pull weight over here, okay? So you're talking it's going to be another 500 years or so before the Assyrians are a threat. But Manetho doesn't know this because the Assyrians are like the biggest threat to Egypt. They take over Egypt like a couple hundred years before him, and they put a Cushite on the throne, and they have his capital at Sais. So Sais is going to be mentioned a lot in his records, but he also knows, he has access to the Bible. And he is trying to reconcile the Bible to their own records. And then Josephus and Julius Africanus and Eusebius and other guys who have had access to his record are reporting on stuff that's in here. So we don't have a complete copy of Manetho. What we have are these different accounts that come from guys like Josephus and Julius Sextus Africanus, who's from Cyrene. Eusebius is from Caesarea. And then Josephus, who is from Israel. Okay? And these people are reporting on having read it and what he says about them. So here's what we find out. It says, Manetho attaches to him certain legends, having doubtless forgotten that they are, according to their own chronicle, the exodus of the shepherd took place 518 years earlier, okay? So we know they have that in there. It also says this. It says, the first writer upon whom I shall dwell is one whom I used a little earlier as a witness to our antiquity. I refer to Manetho, this writer who had undertaken to translate the history of Egypt from the sacred books. So that's talking about their priestly books. Began by stating that our ancestors came into Egypt with many tens of thousands and gained mastery over the inhabitants. And he himself admitted that at a later date they again were driven out of the country, occupied what is Judea, founded by Jerusalem, and built the temple. Up to this point, he followed Chronicles. Thereafter, by offering a record and legends, current talk about the Jews, he took to the liberty of interpolating improbable tales in his desire to confuse with the crowd of the Egyptians, for who leprosy and other maladies had been condemned, he says, to banishment from Egypt. After citing a king Amenhophis, so this is probably like Amenhotep, a fictitious person, for which the reason he did not venture to define the length of his reign, although in the case of the other kings he adds their years precisely, Manetho attaches to him certain legends, having doubtless forgotten that according to his own chronicle, the exodus of the shepherds of Jerusalem took place 518 years earlier. For Thutmose, that's Thutmose, was king when they set out, and according to Manetho, so notice that he's saying Thutmose the third, is the king when the Jews set out. That's the exact person that I say is the king who the Jews set out. And according to Manetho, the intervening reigns thereafter occupied 393 years, down to two brothers, Sethos and Hermeneus, the former of whom they say took the new name Egyptus, and the latter that of Danaus. Okay? Egyptus and Danaus are legends that pop up among the Greeks in the 8th century. Okay? So we're talking about 600 years after the Jews leave Egypt. These legends of Egyptus and Danaus pop up from the fact that these two rivals, these are the Copts and the Danites, are rivaling over Crete and over these cities in Achaia, and the Danites are throwing them out and taking over these cities, okay? And so they invent this legend of two guys named Egyptus and Danaus, who were the original kings from where the Coptics and the Danites come from, and that there's this rivalry between these two brothers that turned into this conflict between the Danites and the Copts, okay? The the Greeks are known for making up stories like this. And by this time, the Greeks have conquered the Egyptians, so the Egyptians are accepting the Greeks' lies, basically. And this is stuff that you're going to find in Plato's Timaeus, that, if they say their ancestors came from here, it's our custom to believe them. Why? Because they say it. They're not going to call BS, okay? But the Greeks do this. Danaus is literally Dana. It's Dan, and then the Greeks just add us. Egyptus is literally Gipt. It's Gipt. Gipt is another way of saying Kipt or Copt, and the Greeks are going to add Egyptius, just like they're going to take the Thracians or the Trojans and call them Etruscans. They're going to call them Egyptus, and then the US is at the end of every male name. So they're going to be like, who's Egypt? Oh, Egypt is from an ancient guy named Egyptus. They're going to do this with all their gods. They're going to take Adonai and call him Adonias, and that's where Hades comes from. That's the original name of Hades, okay? It's Adonai-us, and that's exactly how you pronounce Adonai. It's the I is actually pronounced E in Hebrew. So it's Adonai, and they add us at the end. Adonias, that's the original Homeric name of Hades. Okay? Because the Danites are there. That's why. They're getting these names. And then the original name of Poseidon is Posis Dan. Okay? And Dan is how you would pronounce Dan in Hebrew. It's not, the D-A-N is pronounced Dan. Okay? So Poseidon literally means the Lord of Dan. It's Potus Dan. Potus Dan. Okay? And you put them together, it's Posi or Posis or Potus Dan. Okay? Posis Dan is the Lord of Dan. That's the oldest god we know among the Greeks. And then after him, we have, by Homer, we have Zeus and Hades. Zeus just means God. It's just the nominative form of the word theos or deus. It's just a generic name that means God. And then Hades, so you got Poseidon. One means Lord of Dan. One means my Lord, Adonai. So with an us at the end, it's just a masculine name form of my Lord. And then one is just the generic name for God. And then they have all three different names of what these people are calling the Most High God. And so they make them three brothers and kind of make them synonymous with Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then afterwards, they're going to invent the Titans and stuff like that too. Okay? They're just making stuff up hundreds and hundreds of years later. So when it comes to the Achaean name, the Greeks call him Ahiyawa. Now this is important. Ahi, you're going to find two guys in Israel when they go to study the ark and one of them touches it and drops down dead. His name is Ahio. Ahio means brother, okay? So Ahi is a shortened Semitic form of brother. Ahi is also used in the Lydian language, and Ahi would mean my brother, okay? Yawa is what they would call Ionia or Yawin. So the Hebrew, you're going to see in your Bibles Javin, but it's actually pronounced Yawin. Okay? This is not, I forget what the Hebrew letter is called, but the J's, that is like a Greek anglicized version of it. Okay? The Hebrew is Yawin. Okay? So Ahiyawa, my brother, is Javin. That's what these people's name. The Ahiyawa is the brothers of Javan. Okay? So this word brother can mean ally, or it can mean a marital alliance, or it can mean a blood brother. Okay? So these people on the other side, this is really important, on this side of the Aegean, they're called Yawan, or Yawa, okay? Like the Luwian call the Ionians Ayawa, okay? Ayawa. Ahiyawa is the brother of Yahweh, or the brethren of Yahweh, okay? So this is the name, and then the Egyptians are going to transliterate that to, I don't know why they do it this way, they're going to call Ahiyawa Echwesh. So there, remember the guttural CH sound, Achwesh, you have two H's, Achi. You're going to have a guttural H, so they're going to say Achwe, and they're going to have the esh at the end. I don't know why. Like this Sicily is shekeli, esh, and they're going to have esh. It's like saying ites to the Egyptian, okay? So Echwesh is their way of saying the Ahiawans or Achaeans, okay? The CH comes from the guttural H, Achaeans, okay? The Achaeans become what we pronounce in English, the Achaeans, okay? Achwesh is basically saying Achaeanites, okay, or Achaites, okay, to an Egyptian. So pay attention. You have Karkika, Luca, and Sheridan, okay? The Sardinians are going to be the main people who the Danites are displacing in the tin trade, because if you go to the days of Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, which are 1st century BC Hebrew writers, they say that for the longest time there has been a transport of tin overland from England to Marseille, okay? Well, what's right next to Marseille? It's a port, and what's this right here? That's Corsica, and right here, that's Sardinia, okay? And then just south of that is Sicily, okay? So these Sardinians, or Sheridan, or the Shekelesh, or Sicilians, are going to be the people who pick up the tin from Marseille and bring it over to Crete to make bronze, So when the Danites come and take over this, remember the Tuatha De Dan are going to show up in Ireland. They're going to start shipping it themselves. And what they seem to do is take it overland to Danishungen. And Danishungen is a German name for a town at the base of the Danube River, where the Alps start the Danube River. And it's going to be called, it means Danish people. Okay, Danish people. So see, there's Dardanus. Okay, so this is they're going to do the same here. They're going to make up a legendary King Dardanus, because Dardana, which means settlement of Dan, they're going to be like, well, where did the settlement of Dan come? And they'll be like, add a US at the end of whatever the city's name is. And they'll be like, oh, there's once this legendary king named Dardanus. And Dardanus had a vision with the king of Troy. We're going to call him, because the name is called Ilius. And so it's King Ilius or something like that. They just make up these names and tell a story about these guys and how they did this and they did this. And that's how they ended up with a land called Dardanus. These are dumb goat herders who don't read or write, okay? There's no way they're keeping this for hundreds of years. They also migrate all over the place. Okay, they don't have great civilizations yet. So what you're going to have is, if you go across the Black Sea from here, this is where the Danites are. They're uphill from Troy. Why? Because they're intercepting the tin that would normally go from Troy to the Hittites. And so they're also in Ireland because they're intercepting the transport out from Cornwall and Devon of the tin that would normally go down through Marseille, through Sardinia and Shekelesh. This is why the Sardinians and the Shekelesh are pissed off, and they're raiding too, right? Because the Danites have taken over their trade, okay? And it's going to go down from Danishingen, down the Danube River, and into the Black Sea, and Danube literally means Dan River, okay? And then they're going to catch it at Dardanus. And of course they're going to be right uphill from Troy, because they make sure the Trojans can't get to that sea trade. It goes around here. These are called the Dardanelles, and goes to Dardanus, right? They picked a place based on intercepting the tin trade. And then they've got the Tuatha De Dan in there, and then they control Crete. So if any tin or bronze gets to Crete, they control that from Knossos. And then they've got... and then they've got Thebes. Tiryns is an ally of theirs. Mycenae and all this. And then Knossos, okay? And so pretty much anything that comes. So the stuff that's going to come from Sicily and these guys, they're not just going to sail the open sea. That's how you get your ship sunk. They're going to go to the short route over here, over here, over here, down here, down here. You see how these go down here? And then they're going to go down to Peloponnese or Crete and try to get it over to Troy or Crete, and then it's going to go from Crete to Egypt, okay? This is where they're trying to trade their tin. And the Danites are set up to intercept all of that. And so what are they doing? They're intercepting their tin trade because they're dominant. They also have money because they pillaged Egypt and Canaan. And then they're hiring them as mercenaries. They're like, well, you're not going to get the tin trade anymore. It stops here. You're giving it to us. They'll pay them for it. And then they're hiring them as mercenaries because from about 1386 to 1175, they either have or are fighting over Avaris right here. And so you see 1175, this is where the Sea Peoples are defeated. And what they're doing is they're stopping, they're giving their trade to the Danites, and then the Danites are hiring them as mercenaries and say, let's go fight and take back this and we'll all get rich. Okay? And then the Danites, what's going to happen is, notice this is 1175. 1180 is when they destroy Troy and Hattusa. Both of these get destroyed because the Dardanians right here, and they're called the Danoi or the Danans in the Homeric epic, they're going to destroy Troy, so because that's the Hittites' main trade port for tin. And then you see these Thracians and the Phrygians and whatever other Japhethite people, plus the Ludians or Libyans, they're all going to gang up and they're going to destroy Hattusa and basically collapse the Hittite Empire. And what you're going to have here by the days of Solomon is you're going to have some small Hittite city-states around here that he's feeding them chariots to keep Assyria down. And he's feeding them to, I think, the Aramaeans too. But this is what you're going to have basically by the turn of the 9th century, which is 150, 200 years after this. Okay? By the time you get to the end of the Bronze Age and the start of the Iron Age, you're in David and Solomon's kingdom, And they're getting the idea about iron weapons over bronze weapons from the Philistines because they kicked them out of Crete. They kicked them out of Cyprus, so they're not getting they took over their tin and copper trade, and then they're making sure that the tin gets here to Tyre or Haifa or these places, and it doesn't get down here to where the Philistines are. And so the Philistines are stuck with nothing else to do but to get iron, okay? And what they seem to be doing, because you've got the Philistines here and they can trade for iron from, I mean, iron's cheap and plentiful. It's just making it, okay? So you're talking about iron ore and then turning it into iron that's malleable and hard and stuff like that is a carbonating process. And you're basically beating, I don't know exactly how it's done, but you're beating carbon into this steel with forges and stuff like this. And you're going to find this out in the days of Saul, that they are controlling the forges and they won't let the Jews have any forges, okay? They have to come to them to get their weapons sharpened. So controlling metal forging is what the Philistines do until they're defeated by Saul and David. Then the Jews have that iron metal forging. Now the Jews have iron, and that's when their kingdom starts to become BA, okay? And they start kicking everyone's butt and taking names all over them because they're one of the first to start using iron weapons. And from there, it just spreads everywhere, and everyone starts using iron weapons, and they're in the Iron Age now instead of the Bronze Age. So the Bronze Age collapse is not a collapse of like, oh, there was somehow some crazy stuff that happened. It was the deliberate coming out of the Jews out of Egypt, taking over Canaan, collapsing the Hittite Empire, destroying Troy, collapsing the Minoan civilization, taking it over to the Achaean civilization, and then they seem to get in fights with each other, or at least their allies, and the Trojans seem to be related to Tyre. And they're so intertwined that the early Christians are finding Phoenician records of people saying that King Menelaus, who is, see Menelayan right here, that's ancient name for Sparta, he is going to come to Tyre and meet with King Hiram, who's the guy who is helping David and Solomon build the temple. And by this time, the main guy of Tyre is King Hiram, or I'm sorry, not King Hiram. He's the bronze smith. Remember, tin and copper make bronze. He's the bronze smith who works on the temple named Hiram Abiff. That's where the Freemasons' patronage comes from. And this is where he's the master of bronze. So he's the best bronze guy in the known world probably at this time, because they have monopolized the production of bronze down to here. They're getting it here. They're still doing it here, but this is controlled by Danites. They're getting copper from here. They're controlling tin both overland and across the sea from here. And they're consolidating it down to Tyre, and they're basically controlling bronze now. And their allies are getting it, which is Israel and Judah, and nobody else is. And this is why in their days, they're just like, everybody's dealing in gold. They have the superior weapons. They have the best chariots. They have all this stuff because they have the best metalcraft. They've been controlling this trade for a couple hundred years now. So I'm going to show you where Manetho is going to admit the same thing about these guys coming from Jerusalem. So these guys are going to account, these are all, this book is just Manetho. It's all the different records of things that are said by Manetho, and they're going to have some variation in them because they're not the best. So remember how I tell you in the days of Joshua, they're going to take over Avaris again, or Goshen, okay? So first of all, they're going to call the land of the Jews the Nome of Satis, which is based around Seth, the god Set, okay? And remember how I told you the Jews probably called God before they knew the name Yahweh, the god of Seth, all the way back from Seth, the son of Adam, okay? So the Jews call him Seth. The Kassites, when they go, this is the king, his name is Cushan Riphthaim or something like that. It basically means the Cushite who is doubly wicked Cushite, basically is the name. This king, when he goes to attack the Israelites, in their records it says he waged a campaign against the Satoi or something like that. So somehow they equate the God of these Israelites or Hebrews, or just, all of them, because remember, these other people are descendants of Abraham too, with Set or Seth, okay? Because they're probably calling the God of Seth before they know the name Yahweh. And he says, let's see, When the men in the stone quarries had suffered hardships for considerable time, they begged the king to assign them a dwelling place and a refuge of the deserted city of the shepherds of Avaris. So notice it's a deserted city, okay? So this is Josephus talking about the what the Egyptians say about them. He says, the first writer who I shall dwell is one who I used a little earlier as a witness to our antiquity. I refer to Manetho. This writer, of whom had undertaken to translate the history of Egypt from the sacred books, began by stating that our ancestors came against Egypt with many 10,000s and gained a mastery over those inhabitants, and then he himself admitted that at a later date again they were driven out of the country. So notice at a later date again they were driven out of the country, occupied what is now Judea, founded Jerusalem, and built the temple. So Manetho, when you read everything he says about the Israelites, he lumps together the age of Solomon, the age of Joseph, and the age of Moses as if they're like right after each other rather than separated by hundreds of years. Okay, he calls the people who come from Jerusalem Salimites. He calls the city Jerusalem when it's really Jebus, and then he just acts like just all happens in tandem. But what he's confusing it with is basically the Israelites coming peacefully into the land, then the land getting decimated by God and them leaving, and then them coming back under Joshua and taking over Goshen again, as if all this stuff happened basically in like one generation. Okay? So he says, at this point, he followed the Chronicles. Thereafter, he offered to record the legends and current talk about the Jews. He took the liberty of interpolating probable tales in the desire to confuse us with a crowd of Egyptians who, for leprosy and other maladies, had been condemned, he says, to banishment from Egypt. Okay, these are supposed other people who have been banished out of Egypt, and he's saying they're confusing them with the Jews because we weren't banished from Egypt. Okay, well, there were some Jews that were banished from Egypt. They're the Judites and Danites and whoever was taking over Goshen, because in Joshua it says that the territory of Goshen went to the Judites. So if we look at Joshua 15, this is when he's allotting the land. This is everything that the Judites are going to get. It says, this is the inheritance of the tribe of the children of Judah according to their families. Remember, the Danites are pressed up against them because they can't take their land. And it says, go all the way down to 1551. And it says, and Goshen, and Holon, and Gilo, 11 cities with their villages. So between these three lands, Holon and Gilo are two areas of Judah up in the mountains of Judah, and then Goshen is down in Egypt. There's 11 cities plus their suburbs, okay? So between these three places, there's 11 cities that belong to Judah. Then it says Arab, Duma, Ashan, all these other places. So all these places are from Judah all the way down through, and they also are going to get Ekron, Ashdod. These are all the territories of Gaza. So the Judahites get this right away, but then they lose it in the next generation because the Danites are going to run the Philistines out of Crete and Cyprus, and they're going to come and bolster the ranks of the Philistines, and then they're going to take weight again. Remember, when the sea people come and try to take over Egypt, they fail and they end up in the Philistine lands and Phoenicia. That's why the Philistines get strong again, because they're getting kicked out of other places and they're coming back and taking over these cities again. And the Jews just aren't enough because they're dealing with other things having to do with like the Moabites and the Kassites and all this other stuff, and they're just too busy to retake those cities for them. So anyways, he says, having doubtless forgotten that according to their own chronicle, the exodus of shepherds took place 518 years earlier. Okay? So what is he saying? He is conflating how long this expulsion is from the Jews. Now, he has 518. Other records have 511 years, and I want to show you how long that time is, okay? Now, they have... this is another record with Manetho in it. It says that they came in... It says, we had formerly a king whose name was Timaeus or Thothamaeus. In his time, it came to pass, I know not how, that God was displeased with us, and there came up from east a strange manner of men of an ignoble race, who had the confidence to invade our country, and they subdued it by their power without a battle. And their first king is Salatus, okay? This is one of the Egyptian chronicles that talks about the Hyksos. And then it says, and observing the Sayot Nome upon the cast of the Bubasite channel, the city which some ancient theological reference was called Avaris. So there's their city, Avaris, okay? And the people are called the Hyksos, that is shepherd kings, for Hyk, according to their sacred dialect, denotes a king, and Sos signifies a shepherd. But this is according to the vulgar tongue, and these compounded in the term as Hyksos, and they say they were Arabians. This people who were denominated shepherd kings of their own descendants retained the possession of Egypt for a space of 511 years. Now, why 511 years? Well, remember how I said that the Jews come in under Joseph around 1700, okay? So if you go 1700... minus 511, that's going to take you to 1189, okay? Remember when I told you the Trojan Wars start? It's 1180, okay? Or I'm sorry, Troy is sacked in 1180, okay? Remember I told you about the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples are going to first come in Ramses, and he's 1279 to 1213. This is when he starts driving them out. He talks about, this is going to be in Manetho, him driving these shepherd kings out and all the way up to Syria. That's where the Battle of Kadesh takes place. And that's the Hittites coming against him, thinking he's going to come try to take their land. They fight for a bit. Both sides have mercenary contingents, it seems like. And it seems like the Judahites and the Danites are fighting against the Egyptians because they just got run out of Egypt. And these are denoted in the description of Kadesh as the Dardani and the Caleb, the people of Caleb. Okay? So this is clearly the Judahites of Hebron and the Danites who were occupying Avaris. This is when it starts. See, this is not right. This is supposed to be 1275. And the last one, Anasmatan of Amenop, that says 1125 to 1100. This is the absolute last mention that we have of Egypt of the Sea Peoples, that's going to take you to around the time of I believe the judgeship of Eli, because you're going to have Eli for 37 years and then Samuel for 40 years, and that's going to overlap with Saul for 10 or 20 years, and then Saul's going to be king in 1050. So roughly around here, you're in the judgeship of Eli. Samson would have been gone. All these guys would have been gone. That's the last mention of the Sea Peoples, which makes sense because after Samson, the Philistines get bolstered again. The main defeat of the Sea Peoples by Ramses III takes place in, remember, he's in 1186, and he's got 3 mentions of them: the Rhetorical Stela, the Papyrus Harris, which is dated in 1152, and the Medinet Habu. So somewhere between 1186 and 1150, that's when he defeats the Sea Peoples. So this seems to be their last attempt to take Avaris, okay? Now compare that to what he says. 511 years is going to take you to 1189. Ramses III is king around 1186, okay? And he fights the last battle where they're victorious over the Sea Peoples. Now, in year 8 of his reign is when he defeats the Sea Peoples. So that's going to be, if this is accurate, that he starts in 1186, that'd be 1178, okay? Now remember, that one says a 511, the other one says 517, so let's add 6 years to that. Takes you to 583. That's within 5 years of him defeating the Sea Peoples. So what it seems like is going on, remember, the Egyptians don't have these massive numbers. They have cities all over the Nile, okay? And they have to keep these cities policed, plus they're subjugating the Nubians and the Cushites to the south, plus they're dealing with attacks from Libya, from these Danites and their allies. They don't just have endless people to go occupy and rebuild Avaris. But in the days of Ramses II, they do. And they rebuild Avaris, and they name it Pi Ramses. So when the Israelites are updating their Bibles and saying the Israelites built the city of Pi Ramses, the reason they're saying that is because their city has been taken back over and then overbuilt and renamed Pi Ramses. The Jews want you to know that we built Pi Ramses, which was the original name, was Avaris. That it wasn't originally built by Ramses, it was built by the Jews. Because that's Avaris, that was their capital city that they had, and then they lost it, okay? So the Jews got a claim on this land because it's a city and it's you know, whatever. The lands were cultivated by them, the cities were built by them, and then Ramses II is going to take them over. So now listen to what Manetho says about them. He says, after these things, he relates how a king of Thebes and other parts of Egypt made an insurrection against the shepherds, and that a long and mighty war was carried out between them till the shepherds were subdued by a king whose name was Alisphagramuthosis. I don't know who that is. And were by him driven out of the rest of Egypt and hem within a place containing 10,000 acres, which is called Avaris. So in other words, they don't consider Goshen part of Egypt. They're saying they were driven out of the rest of Egypt and hemmed into a place called Avaris. All this tract, says Manetho, the shepherds surrounded with a vast and strong wall so that they might retain the possessions of their prey within a hold of strength. And they literally had a channel from Avaris going out to the Mediterranean Sea where they could trade, and then a fortified city where they could store their goods, okay? And then it says, then Thutmose, remember Thutmose the third is the guy who drives them, or the guy who, there's Thutmose the first, second, and third, and I think it's Thutmose the second who would have been king when Moses had to flee, and then Thutmose the third who would have been king during the Exodus, okay? He says, the son of Alisphagramuthosis endeavored to force them out by a siege and beleaguered the place with a body of 480,000 men. But at the moment then he despaired of reducing them to a siege. They agreed to a capitulation, and they would leave Egypt and would be permitted to go without molestation wheresoever they pleased. Okay? Now, I have a feeling he is conflating the murder of the babies. He's not talking about the murder of the babies. With them just surrounding them and besieging them and telling them you can leave if you want to. Okay? And then he says, and according to this stipulation, they departed from Egypt with all their families and effects, in number not less than 240,000, okay? According to Israel, it's a lot more, but they're saying not less than 240,000, and bent their way through the desert towards Syria. But as they stood in fear, now remember, they're going towards Syria. Syria is the land that would be just north of, to them, Lebanon, okay? So it would have been called Soel, Syria in the time of the Greeks. That's what they would have named it. And so that would have been the land just north of Canaan was called Syria. It's not Assyria, it's Syria, okay? And it says, but they stood in fear of the Assyrians, who then had dominion over Asia. This is not true. This is what they think based on their own era. The Assyrians don't have dominion over anything. He says, they built a city in that country, which is now called Judea. Remember, this is where they occupy and where they come from, of a sufficient size to contain this multitude of men, and named it Jerusalem. None of this is true. They do sack Jebus, but then it gets reoccupied. That's documented in Joshua and Judges, okay? It says, in another book of Egyptian histories, Manetho says that this people, who is called the shepherds in their sacred books, were styled captives. So Manetho is acknowledging reading the Hebrew records, which is the Bible, okay? Remember, the Septuagint is written around 10 years after this, which means the Hebrews do have records that he has access to. So when you know that 10 years after Manetho's writing this, the Jews are writing the Septuagint, they're collaborating, okay? And they're making their stuff line up. Then it says, after the departure of this nation of shepherds to Jerusalem, Thutmose, the king of Egypt, who drove them out, reigned 25 years and 4 months, and then he died, okay? So let's look for Thutmose. So we have Thutmose the second, reigns for 13 or 14 years. Thutmose the third, reigns for 54 years. So he'd have to reign 24 years after kicking out the Jews, okay? There's no other Thutmoses. So it has to be Thutmose the second. Well, this Thutmose the second, or I'm sorry, Thutmose the third, is who they're saying drove out the Jews under Moses, okay? So then he says, after him, his son Hebron, it's so amazing that his son is named Hebron, that is weird, took the government into his hands, and for 14 years after him reigned Amenhophis for 27 years and 7 months, okay? And then then his sister Ameses, 21 years and 9 months, and she was succeeded by Mephiris, who reigned 12 years and 9 months. So we're going to compare that with what we have. He calls him Amenophis, and this is Amenhotep. He says he reigns 27 years, 1427 to 1401. Oh, there's a Thutmose the fourth. I apologize. He's going to reign 9 years-ish, it looks like. And the names that he has is Amesis. So Amenophis, I would assume, is Amenhotep. Amesis, I would assume, is Amhos. Mephres, I don't know. And then Mephrothosis. So Amesis is a sister, it says. So we have Amenhotep, and then we have Akhenaten. But Akhenaten was originally Amenhotep III. So they're calling Amenhotep Amenhophis, and then Mephrothosis. I don't know who that is. But you've got lengths of 21 years, 12 years, and 25 years. You've got lengths of 91 to 53 is going to be 35 years. This guy's going to be 9 years. This guy's going to be 25 years. So whoever he is counting, and he was known for counting different kingdoms that ruled, like different states side by side as if they were after each other. It seems like he's counting Amenhotep right here, and then Amenophis the second and the third, who are just listed in other records, and these are going to be, I believe, the Ramses II's king list. I forgot what his name is. So anyways, it says, this king Sethosis appointed his brother Armaeus over viceroy over Egypt. He also invested him with the other authority of the king, but with these restrictions that he should not wear the diadem or interfere with the queen or the mother of the children, nor abuse the royal concubines. Sethosis made an expedition to Cyprus and Phoenicia and waged war with the Assyrians and the Medes. Okay, the Medes were not anywhere near this by this time. Neither were the Assyrians, okay? This is how you know his records are jacked up, okay? And he subdued them all, some by force of arms and without a blow, and other by mere terror of his power, being puffed up by his success. And he advanced still more confidently and overthrew the cities and subdued the countries of the east. The Egyptian pharaohs were known for saying, oh, we went out and we conquered Greece and we conquered Persia and all this stuff to their subjects who, how can we verify this? We don't know. Like, how can we get over there and figure out that this is bullcrap? We don't have an internet, okay? So they would just, they beat the Assyrians and Medes in those days. Well, the Assyrians and the Medes wouldn't have been known to the Egyptians. The Assyrians would have. They would have been a small kingdom, but the Medes, definitely not. The Medes aren't really going to be on the map till the latter part of the Assyrian kingdom. Then Armaeus, who left Egypt and took advantage of the opportunity and fearlessly committed all those acts which his brother enjoined him not to do, he violated the queen and continued with unrestrained intercourse with the rest, and as persuasion of his friends, he assumed the diadem and openly opposed his brother. So it's clear we have civil war and stuff like that going on, and opposing forces trying to get the crown. He says, but a ruler over the priests of Egypt sent to Thesothus and informed him how what had happened and how his brother had set himself up in opposition to his power. And up upon this, Sethosis immediately returned to Pelusium, which I have a feeling is where the Philistines come from. And he recovered his kingdom. In the country of Egypt, remember, he was in Cyprus and Philistia, so this is probably what they call the Philistine territories. He says, the country of Egypt took its name from Sethosis and was called Egyptus, and the brother of Armaeus was known by the name of Danaus. So they're adopting the Greek legends as having to do with these two brothers. They're basically saying, oh, that legend is true, but it was these brothers, and that's where they get the names Egyptus and Danaus. This is bullcrap, okay? So it's going to talk some more about the, let's see. It says, after which he writes this word for word, when those who were sent to work in the quarries had continued for some time in that miserable state. So apparently there's some people who had been driven out by leprosy. He says the king was petitioned to set apart for their habitation and protection the city of Avaris that had been left desolate by the shepherds. Okay, so we know that the city was left desolate by the shepherds and then reoccupied by supposedly these slaves who had been quarrying in the mines. Well, these mines that they're quarrying are all the way over in Arabia and in like the Sinai Peninsula and stuff like that, okay? And then he says, and he granted them their desire. Now the city, according to theology, is called the Typhonian city. And when these men had taken possession of the city, they found it well adapted for a revolt. They appointed over themselves a ruler out of the priests of Heliopolis, one whose name is Osarsiph, and they bound themselves by oath that they would be obedient. So in other words, they revolted, and Avaris was independent. That's what they're claiming, okay? Osariph then, in the place, enacted this law that they should neither worship the gods nor abstain from any of those sacred animals which the Egyptians hold in highest venerations, but sacrifice and slay them all. So they're taking over the city, they're revolting against them, and now they're performing animal sacrifices there. And that they should not connect themselves, but then none as such as were of that confederacy. When they had made such laws as there, they and many others of tendency directly in opposition to the customs of the Egyptian, he gave orders that they should employ a multitude of hands in rebuilding the walls about the city and hold themselves in readiness for war with Amenhotep, so Amenhotep, the king, whilst he took into confidence the counsel of some others, of the priests, of the unclean persons. He sent ambassadors to the city called Jerusalem, and those shepherds who had been expelled by Thutmoses, so this would be Moses's leaving Egypt, whereby he informed them of the affairs themselves and the others who had been treated in the same ignominious manner, and requested that they come with one consent to his assistance to war against Egypt. He's claiming that they went and got allies from Jerusalem, from the Jews who had been expelled under Thutmoses, so the Jews who came under Avaris. He also promised in the first place to reinstate their ancient city and country Avaris, and to provide a plentiful maintenance for the host, and fight for them on occasion that they might require, and inform them that they could easily reduce the other country under their dominion. The shepherds received this message with the greatest joy, and quickly mustered to the number 200,000 men, and came up to Avaris. So he's saying flat out that there were these people. Remember, the city had been evacuated by the Hyksos, or the Israelites, okay? And then these other people who had been basically allowed to live there, because they were essentially slaves quarrying the mines. They had been allowed to live there where the Jews used to live. They sent messages to the people of Jerusalem and said, you could easily take this back over. And so they do. And how many men does it say they have? 200,000 men that came up to Avaris. So let's do some math here. Who are the people who are in the territory of Judah of military age? Okay, we're going to have 3 armies. We're going to go to Numbers, and we're going to go to Dan. Dan has three scores, 2,700, okay? The Judahites have 76,000, so between those two, there's 130. Now we're going to go to Simeon. And the Simeonites have 59,000. So you add together the armies of Dan, Judah, and Simeon. Those are the 3 militaries that are in Judah. You have 200,000 men, okay? So what does this say? It says, after these guys, these slaves, whoever they are, came from the quarries and resettled Avaris and started to rebel against Egypt, he said that they petitioned the Jews of Jerusalem to come back to Avaris, or Goshen, and he promised them in the first place to reinstate them their ancient city and country Avaris, and provide a plentiful maintenance for their host, and fight for them on occasion might acquire. So in other words, they're going to be mercenaries for them. So who are these people? They're probably some of the other sea peoples. Whoever they are were enslaved by the Egyptians. That they could easily reduce the country under their dominion, the shepherds received this message with the greatest joy, and quickly mustered the number 200,000 men, and came to Avaris. Now Amenhotep, this is Amenhotep, the king of Egypt, when he was informed of their invasion, was in great consternation, remembering the prophecy of Amenhotep, the son of Paphos, and he assembled the armies of the Egyptians, and took counsel with the leaders, and commanded the sacred animals to be brought to him, and especially those with whose were held the greatest veneration in the temples, and particularly charged the priests to conceal the images of their gods with utmost care. And his son Sethos, who was, so that would be Seti, who was also called Ramses from his father Ramses, being but 5 years old, he committed to the protection of a friend, and he marched with the rest of the Egyptians, being 300,000 warriors against this enemy. Remember, it's 300,000 against 200,000, but they have a fortified city, okay? who advanced to meet him, but he did not attack them, thinking it would be to wage war against the gods. He gathers 300,000 men to attack them. They've got 200,000, but it said he did not attack them, thinking it would be to wage war against the gods. Why? These are the Jews who their God just destroyed. Remember, they're claiming we drove them out of Egypt, but they know their God kicked our ass. Okay? And then their God kicked the crap out of everybody in Canaan. And by this time, this is in the days of Joshua, Othniel hasn't fought the Kassites yet. That's going to happen in the next generation, within like 30 years of this. By this time, we're still in the days of Joshua. Remember, we have Amenhotep as king, okay? So Amenhotep II, 1427 to 1401. Joshua starts his campaign in 1406, okay? And then it talks about he has a son named Seti, who's really Ramses, okay? Well, Ramses isn't going to be for like another 100 years. So he's jacking up his records again, but he is talking about the Amenhoteps. So his children, he's going to have another Amenhotep who doesn't end up being the heir. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Amenhotep II, and then Thutmose III, then Amenhotep III. This is going to be during Joshua's campaign too. Joshua's going to die in 1386. So whether it's Amenhotep II or Amenhotep III, and it says he has a son named Setos. He has a son named Setamun. So that might be his son. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, Setamun. Oh, no, that's a daughter. His daughters are named Thutmose. So he seems to just be jumping forward because Seti and Ramses are related. Ramses II, his predecessor is Seti. And his predecessor is Ramses. And his predecessor is Horemheb. So the Setis and the Ramses, and this is going to be the people who end the 14th dynasty, but that's like 75 years later. Okay, so his records are all jacked up, but what is he saying? What are these narratives that he is concluding? One is he's trying to act like that the supposed rivalry of Egyptians and Danaans, which is based on the Coptics and the Danites, is based on these two guys who are vying for the Pharaoh's throne. Then he's talking about how the Jews came back and took Avaris, but they didn't attack them, thinking it would be to wage war against the god, but he returned and came again to Memphis, where he took Apis and the other sacred animals they had sent for, and retreated immediately into Ethiopia together with his army and all the multitude of Egyptians, for the king of Ethiopia was under obligations to him. Therefore he received him kindly and took care of all the multitude that was with him, while the country supplied all that was necessary for their food. He allotted to him cities and villages during their exile, which is to continue from its beginning during the predestined 13 years. Moreover, he pitched a camp for the Ethiopian army, which was at the borders of Egypt, to the protection of King Amenhotep. So what is he saying? They went up to fight the Jews at Avaris, but they were scared that fighting them would be like fighting the gods, and so they went and retreated down into Ethiopia, and that's where they stayed for the next 13 years. This is their own record saying this, okay? This is Manetho. So the Bible agrees they retook Goshen, and they held it with an army that had to do with the same amount of the army that would be the Judahites and the Danites and the Simeonites combined. That's how big their army was. And we know under Joshua that they destroyed all the land all the way down to Goshen. They destroyed the land all the way down to Kadesh Barnea, all the way over to Edom, and all the way up to Gibeon, and all that land became the land of the Judahites. And the Danites and the Simeonites dwelt among them. And then the Danites are going to expand outward, and the Simeonites are going to blend in with them, because that was part of Jacob's prophecy or curse against the Simeonites because of their violence. Okay, it's the Simeonites and the Levites. So it says, while in the state of these things in Ethiopia, the people of Jerusalem, having come down with the unclean of the Egyptians, treating the inhabitants with such barbarity that those who witnessed their impieties believed that their joint sway was more execrable than that which the shepherds had formerly exercised, for they had not only set fire to the cities and villages, but committed every kind of sacrilege and destroyed the images of the gods, and roasted and fed upon those sacred animals that were worshipped. Remember, the Hebrews sacrifice animals. The Egyptians have sacred animals, and the Hebrews sacrifice them, and they're destroying their gods, okay? And having compelled the priests and prophets to kill and sacrifice them, they cast them naked out of the country. So they're destroying their priesthood, okay? It is said that the priest who ordained their polity and laws was by birth of Heliopolis, that's where Joseph was, and his name was Osarsiph, okay? From Osiris, the god of Heliopolis, but when he went over to these people, his name was changed, and he was called Moises, okay? Listen to what he's saying. He's mixing up Joseph and Moises, and he's saying that he used to be a priest of Osiris, but he switched teams and went over to the Israelites. Now compare that to the story of Moses, who was raised by the Egyptians and then switched over and acknowledged his Hebrew lineage and led the Jews out. So all this stuff, he's like, Josephus is saying, I am reading this verbatim from Manetho, okay? So what do we know? We know that Moses is the guy who is in charge of the Jews. This is the Egyptian records. They believe he was once a priest of Heliopolis, which Joseph was married into that priesthood. And then he went over and it says his name was Osarsiph, from Osiris, the god of Heliopolis. Well, here's the thing. That's not his name. What they're doing is they're combining the name Joseph with the name Osiris and calling him Osarsiph, okay? Osiris was not the god of Heliopolis till centuries later. The god of Heliopolis was Ra, and the name of Joseph was Yachbim Seneca Ra, or the Jacobite who is blessed by Ra, okay? Because he's married into the priesthood of Ra. But after the 18th dynasty took over, they made Osiris the god in place of Ra. This is why you stop seeing Ra in the king's names. And so they're assuming that, he must have been named Osarsiph. This is a combination of Osiris and Joseph. And then his name was changed to Moises. So he's literally acting like Joseph and Moses are the same person. Okay? Now you can tell this is hearsay because they don't know. Moses is the great shame of the Egyptians. He was raised in the household of Pharaoh, and then he went and led out half the populace of Egypt that was basically serving the Egyptians. And now they're this mighty kingdom that's growing up in Israel, okay? And so it says, Manetho says again, after this, Amenophis returned from Ethiopia with a great force, and Ramses also. What does that mean? Well, we know Ramses is like 75 years later, which means they were down there in Ethiopia. Basically, they controlled Upper Egypt, so down to Memphis and Thebes, up to Cush, basically. They controlled the south, and the Jews went back to controlling the north. That's what happened. And it says, Ramses also, his son with other forces, encountering the shepherds and the unclean people, they defeated them and slew multitudes of them and pursued them to the bounds of Syria. That's what happens. This matches exactly with the Kadesh inscription, which says he is fighting with people from Caleb, that's the Judahites of Hebron, and Dardania, that's the Danites. He's driving them all the way up. So just like the Jews drove them all the way down, the Canaanites, and took all the way to Goshen, Ramses II is driving them all the way up. And so he's jumping forward. Notice how he jumps forward between Joseph and Moses. That's hundreds of years. And then he's jumping forward again from the days of Joshua to the days of the Battle of Kadesh. So you're talking basically around 1186 or somewhere between somewhere between 1400 and 1386 down to 1275. So as much as 110, 120 years, he is jumping from the days of Joshua to the days of Ramses II. Okay? But the point is, everything that he says here lines up with the Bible and the Kadesh inscription. And it only makes sense if you know they reoccupied Goshen. They started colonies all over the place. I mean, you're talking about 150 years, okay? You can do so much in terms of colonization in 150 years, and this is what the Danites had. They drove these ships called the Pentaconters, which would have 50 oarsmen on these ships, okay? These ships would be built, again, you're going to have like 2 oarsmen on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You're going to have 14 times 4, which is going to be 52, basically. But they're going to say round it to 50, pentaconter. That's what they're called. So you're going to have 2 oarsmen on each side. Okay, remember the Danites army is 64,000 people. Okay, and they're basically Viking warriors. Okay, These ships are actually going to sail all the way over to Ireland, and that's where the Tuatha De Danann show up in these ships. And these ships are going to be used around Ireland, and then the Danish, or the Danites in the north, are going to eventually evolve this ship into the Viking longship. Let's look at the Viking longship. So here's the Viking longship, and literally it's just like a bigger, heavier dutier version of the Pentaconter. That's all it is. This is a scaled down version, but they put their shields on the outside because these guys all have shields, and it's extra blockage from arrows and stuff. And then they sit on the inside, and then they row. And I think the Viking longships actually row standing up. I could be wrong, but let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 rows, 52. The Viking longship is just literally barely an evolution of the Egyptian Pentaconter. This should not be hard to figure out. They have one big square sail, 2 rows of 13. I mean, think about this. If you're going to count a bunch of ships and be like, how many rows of oars should we have? 13. Why? 13. Because the Danites are the 13th hidden tribe of Israel. Remember, Joseph's 2 sons are divided, so there's actually 13th tribes, and the Danites are the 13th hidden tribe of Israel. And how many rows they have? 13. Okay? Why 13? We've got these ships of the Vikings and these ships of the Greeks and Egyptians and Cretans and the Irish, and they all have 13 rows, and they all have one square sail. Why? Because the same people are designing them. The Danites are doing this. They're barely different. They're just gotten a little stronger and a little bit bigger. That's it. But it's the same basic setup. And they're going to raid all over, and they're going to become the same people. And if you think these are 2 different ships from 2 totally different people with the exact same design, that's absurd. Okay? So, oh yeah, and they're also called Danan in Danish. It's just the Germanic way of saying ites or ish or esh. It's the same people. It's the same people. They just look genetically different because they intermarry with everybody they go with. So now, these guys, by 1180, remember, Joshua dies in 1386. Okay, he starts his campaign in 1306, dies in 1386. Okay, Othniel is going to, 18 years later, fight against the Kassites, these guys, who basically by this time would have taken over cities along the Euphrates up here, and then they try to pour into here because the Egyptians can't do crap to help these cities, and the Kassites are trying to get a marriage alliance with the Egyptians. Basically, they're trying to replace the Mitanni, okay? And so the Kassites come in here, and they say how they're fighting the Setiu. That's what they call the people, the Setiu, okay? Remember what the Egyptians are calling them. They're calling their nome, the nome that the Hyksos realm, the Setite nome, or the Setaite nome. And they're saying that the city of Sais, which is where the Kushite kingdom is eventually going to go, this is where Pythagoras is going to go to, is named for the Sethite nome, okay? And Seth, they consider to be the god of the Hyksos, who's a storm god of the desert, which is Job and Yahweh as a whirlwind. And these guys are coming to go fight the Setiu, okay? And they go to fight them, and they put them down, and that's when Othniel defeats them. And it's after Othniel defeats them that the 18th dynasty starts to fall apart. Akhenaten tries to make himself like the son of God. He tries to get everybody to worship the sun, and he's the one intercessor between them and Aten-Ra. Okay? So he's trying to make himself like an antichrist to try to hold the kingdom together. And he fails, and within like 20 years after him, it gets overthrown. And then Ramses I is going to be the people who takes that over, and they're going to build up their forces, and they're going to drive these people out. They're going to drive all the way up to here, and then they're going to fight this Battle of Kadesh, which is them driving the Jews out of Egypt all the way up to here, and they're trying to take back this stuff that used to be their turf, but they're going to fight to a stalemate with the people of Caleb, the Dardani, a few other people, and the Hittites, okay? And they're never going to come out of Egypt again. to try to pull away. They come out during the days of Solomon because Solomon's married in with them and take a couple cities. But they never try to pull weight against the Hittites again. But the Hittites also are going to go down. Remember, this is 1275 when this happens. By 1180, so 95 years later, Hattusa is going to be destroyed because the Danites take over their bronze trade. And they take over Troy and they do all this stuff and they're done. And then the Danites basically lead to the dominance of the Jews, but they leave their inheritance and they essentially stop circumcising themselves. They leave Egypt because they're kicked out of Egypt and they basically are here. They're here, this kingdom of Mopsus. And they find in the days of Assyria, in the days of the Assyrian Empire, we have a stele or something like that that's inscribed in Phoenician and Luwian that talks about the kingdom of the line of Mopsus, which is a Danite king who is going to be over Mopsueti right here. It means the hearth of Mopsus, okay? And that they're still there, and they're basically a tributary to Assyria by the 8th century. So this is the Danite kingdom up here. This was Danite for a while, so Adana is one of their main cities. Their ship port is over here at Adana, and then they have a handful of Greek city-states here, and then they have Knossos here. And from there, they seem to go up the Danube. See the Danube right here? This Danube is going to go all the way up. These are different tributaries of the river to Danishungen, which is the Danish people. And that seems to be where they overland the tin. And they keep trading after the Celts come through because the Celts are going to come through and take over all this land. Because the Danites are trading from, hold on. The Danites are trading from Danishingen, which is right here, and it goes all the way down the Danube River that flows into the Black Sea around here, because this is basically the Alps. The Alps is flowing all the way down to the Black Sea, and then Dardana is right here, and this is where they're going. Well, the Celts are going to end up taking over all this, and the legends of the Tuatha De Danann is going to shift to the Celts, because they have all these rivers with Dan or Danu in their name. The Celts are going to do the same thing the Greeks do. And it's like, well, why are the rivers called Danu? Well, the Celts have a different name for river. The Proto-Indo-European name for river is Udra or Ind, okay? So why do we have this one that's the reverse of that, which is Dan or Don, okay? Well, they're going to invent this goddess Danu, who is going to be the primordial goddess of the rivers. And the Celts hold this, and then there's another people. Oh, it's going to spread all the way to India. Because remember, these people are related to the descendants of Magog, which are spread all the way over into China and Korea. And so these people are the Indo-Aryans, and they're going to spread gods and ideas all the way around. And this goddess Danu of the rivers is going to be a Hindu word for this goddess of the rivers, but they've got like 4 or 5 words from rivers because they're borrowing words from other languages. And they find Danu and Dnepr and Dnestr and Don and all these names all over the rivers, which if you know that Dan is pronounced Don, Danube, Don, Dnipro, Dnestr, like all these rivers are just names that are basically Dan River. They all literally mean Dan River, except for Dnipro, which means above Dan. Okay, well, if the Danans have this Dardania right here, these rivers take them to the sea above Dan, and so that's where it's going. And they're eventually, these Danites up here are going to get pushed north into Jutland, which gets renamed Danmark or Dansland. And from there, they're going to go up into Scandinavia. The Finnish come from a different race, but the Norway, the Swedish, and the Norse are basically, that just means Northmen. It's just a German word that means Northmen, and they're the Danish people who went north. And they're going to have the same Viking longboats, and they're going to colonize Iceland, Greenland, and Canada, and Newfoundland and Canada. That's all Danish or Danite territory. So the founders of America out of Europe were really the Danites, not Columbus. And they're finding it in the same longboats that look just like their old Pentaconter with their rows of 13 oars. So that's the history of the Danites. And so this is really important, you conspiracy theorists, because the Norsemen are going to come down and become the Normans. So the people who are just like, does the Antichrist come from the King of England? Listen to this, okay? You weirdos that think the Antichrist comes from the King of England. The Normans, who are Danish, They're going to come down from here. Notice the Norsemen. Here's Denmark. Remember, they're all up and down the rivers, so they got settlements around here, and then they're in Iceland. They're up in Scotland, where the Freemasons come from. This is really important because the Freemasons tie their lineage back to Hiram Abiff, who is a Danite. Okay? He's the Danite bronze craft because it was all about taking over the bronze trade, and he's the Danite bronzesmith from the temple, Hiram Abiff. And look it up here where the Freemasons come from, and here in Iceland and in Sweden. Freemasonry is really big in Sweden. And then you have Denmark and Sweden. They're related. I'm sorry, this is Norway, okay? Well, some of these Vikings are going to come down. Notice this is 911 AD, okay? They're going to come down and they're going to invade down here. And the Franks are going to recognize their prowess in battle. And they're going to settle down in here, and the Franks are going to give them a nobility and lands in France. And they're going to be basically blended with the Franks and then the Proto-Romans to become the Norman. And then the year that they're created, the year that this nobility is created of the people called the Norman, which is just short for the Northmen, is 911. These settlements were finally legitimized when Rollo, a Scandinavian king and leader, agreed to swear fealty to King Charles III of Francia following the siege of Chartres in 911, leading to the formation of the County of Rowan. Okay, remember it's Rollo is his name, and the County of Rowan. This new fief, through the kingship of the decades to come, would expand to what became known as the Duchy of Normandy. And these are the Normans who are going to invade England and take over. And then they're going to lose their duchy in France sometime after they take over England, because they basically run England from that time to the present. The royal monarchy of England is descended from this Rollo. Okay? So you go to Rollo, and his successor is William Longsword, and then Richard the First. This is not Richard the Lionhearted, but notice this is 996. And then Richard the Second, Richard the Third, 1096, Robert the First, William the Second, William the Second, Henry the First, Stephen, Henry the Second. This is going to go all the way up to Henry the Eighth. I am. I believe this Stephen, this Richard the Young, is going to be Richard the Lionhearted. Yeah, the successor is John, and that's John who signs the Magna Carta. And then that's Henry the Third. These are some other guys that I know little about. Edward the First, Edward the Second, Edward the Third, Richard the Second, Henry the Fourth, Henry the Fifth, Henry the Sixth, Edward the Fifth, Edward the Fifth, Richard the Third, Henry the Seventh, super gay looking, and Henry the Eighth, I am, who has all his wives and breaks away from the Roman popes. It's the same line down from 911. So these guys, they're Danites. The royal crown, the people who are like the Antichrist is going to come from England, they have a legit, you're not going to be able to prove it genetically because these guys intermarried with everyone wherever they went, okay? But these guys descend from the Danites through the Danish. And then they're mixed in with the Romans and the Franks and all this other stuff to become the Normans. But these guys are going to go all the way down to King Charles, who gets his head chopped off, and then it's still going to be Charles II, who gets reinstated. And so all the kings of England today, like who's the king of England today? King Charles III. He's part Danite. These people who think King Charles III is the Antichrist, he is part Danite. It's a small part. Probably won't be able to prove it in a genetic test, but these guys are probably the ancestors of the Danish, of the Norse, and of the Tuatha De Danann that came from the Greek islands, because the Tuatha De Danann were supposedly divine people who came from these four great islands in the sea, and the Danites were the sea peoples who dwelt in the city-states around the Greek Peloponnese and Crete. And even though their language has changed, their skin tone has changed, and all this stuff, these guys are actually descended from the royal heritage of Danite kingdoms. Again, can you prove a hard and fast link between the Danish and the Tuatha De Danann and the Danites? The closest thing you have to a link is this ship. But you need to ask yourself, why is this ship and the Viking longboat so similar? Why do they look so similar? And the answer is, why do they have 13 rows of oarsmen? Because they're for Danites. And when the Danites took the island of Adana, they could make 270 of these ships at a time. Okay, so do the math on their. Here's their thing. They can have 52 rowers in these ships, and let's say they're going to have a couple people that are doing other things besides rowing. Okay, so let's say they've got 60 guys per ship. How many of these ships do they need to field their entire army? Well, their army is 64,000. And we know like some of them stay in Israel. When they go into the land, their army is 64,000. So they need 1,000 of these ships. Okay? So of course, they've got Asher, where it talks about how Asher won't come out of their breaches and the Danites won't get off their ship. They're making all these ships here, and then they're making all these ships in Adana, 270 at a time. And they convert their entire people to Vikings. They're essentially Vikings. I mean, you can say what you want about them, but they're Vikings. And then, like, Vikings, for whatever reason, why were the Vikings known for having Here's the Viking horns helmet, okay? Where did this come from? Well, some of the sea peoples that were with the Danyan are the Shurden. They're Sardinians, and they have horned helmets, just like the Vikings do. They were essentially mercenaries for the Danites. So they're probably among them too. And this idea of wearing horn helmets goes all the way back. The reason they think these people are divine is because the divine people are portrayed in their images going all the way back to Naram Sin and the pre-flood people with bull horns on their head. Because remember, it all comes back down to the bull of heaven. And so these guys are all showing up with bull horns on their head, and they seem like scary divine people. These guys, notice they have a Philistine headdress. You've got their Danites, Philistines, Sardinians, and Sicilians. Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. So, again, I'm writing this chapter on Avaris. It is super, super interesting. Also, the Tuatha De Danann seem to become the predecessors to the Druids, who are actually called Druze. And they seem to adopt the transmigration of soul from Pythagoras. So they seem to be people, it's all oral history, and we can't prove it because they didn't write anything down, but they seem to have beliefs that were known to the Romans that came from Pythagoras, who Pythagoras is dedicated to Apollo, so is Mopsus. This is a Danite god. Remember the Danites are supposed to, Apollyon is the spirit behind the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is supposed to come from Dan. And both the Pythagoreans, who influenced the Druids, and Mopsus, who is around the fall of Troy, and he has this kingdom, this lineage that comes from Cilicia, where Saul of Tarsus comes from, they're all associated with the worship of Apollo. They worship a sun god, a sky god, and a nature god, which seems to be like a perverse trinity, just like you had that Apis bull was a perverse trinity. They have a perverse trinity that is basically sky worship, sun worship, and earth worship, essentially. And these Danites love the number 13 because they're the hidden 13th tribe, and they're the real discoverers of America. That is important. They're not only the real discoverers of America, they're the founders of the Freemasons, and they're the legitimate heirs to the English crown. So do you think if I can figure all this stuff out with just the Bible, a little bit of Wikipedia, and stuff having to do with Manetho, I can tell you they had all this stuff in the Freemasons. I can tell you they had all this stuff in the Middle Ages because Manetho's been around from Josephus and these other writers in the church. The monasteries would have had these records. So the monasteries would have been just able to compare the Bible with Manetho's records and come up with basically what I'm coming up with. Maybe not with as much precision because they didn't have as much modern archaeology back then, but they're going to be able to come up with a basic story. And they're able to connect the Danites, Hiram Abiff, the Bronze Trade, Manetho's Egyptus, and what they say is that the Freemasons actually came out of Egypt. They say the Freemasons came out of Egypt during the time of Alexander the Great's conquest, and basically they took the sacred geometry from Egypt, and then it became Euclid's geometry. But the secrets of Egyptian architecture and stonework and all this stuff like that was what the Freemasons carried around, and that's what allowed them to build the cathedrals of Europe and the castles of the European kings and the Knights Templar and all this other stuff, and they eventually end up in Scotland. So that's their own records and stuff like that. And what it seems like, and I've personally met like Mormons and stuff who their tradition comes from Freemasons, they know it's the Danites. They tell you flat out it's the Danites. The Danites created the Freemasons. Which makes sense because the places where, again, if you look at where the Norman went, the places where Freemasonry was the strongest in Europe was Scotland, England, and Sweden. Those were the main places. It is going to be in France. It is going to be in Russia, but they're going to have different names for it. It's going to become Theosophy there. And in Germany, it's going to be Rosicrucians. But the main places Freemasonry is really popular is in England, Scotland, and Norway. And Swedenborg, who comes up with aliens on other planets, and he really is influential in Scottish Rite Freemasonry and practices divination and stuff like that and gets messages from the dead. He's a lot like Mopsus. And Swedenborg has a cult that is going to follow him, and they're going to come out of the Methodists and become the Swedenborgians, and they're going to start to propagate his stuff all over New England and New York. And out of New England and New York is going to come a young lad who gets kicked out of the Methodists, known as Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith is going to have a lot of ideas that are similar to what the Swedenborgians held, and then he's going to join a Freemason lodge in Chicago or in Illinois. And then he's going to basically create the Mormon temple out of the mixture of Freemasonry and Swedenborgianism and the ideas of the Church of Christ, the Restorationist ideas of the Church of Christ. And they're called the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints or the Mormons, and they're going to have a militia called the Danites. This is not a coincidence, you guys. This is not just random people doing random things. This is a demonic heritage that comes from a people who are destined to produce the Antichrist. And they're all, this is really interesting, they're all from a tribe that is pronounced, it says Dan, but it's pronounced Don. When we see the tribe of Dan, it's pronounced Don, like how we would say D-O-N, okay? And I'm going to give a little shout out to John Brisson here. Donald Trump is descended from the Scottish, and his name means world ruler. Don became synonymous with ruler. We have this in Sicily. The Don is the Don, Don Corleone or whatever. The Don is the ruler of the Corleones, okay? These things seem to go all the way back to the Sea Peoples because the Danites were the ruling people of the Sea Peoples. And when you look at the Sea Peoples in Egypt, what you're not going to find in the same list you're not going to find the Ekwesh and the Denyen in the same list. Notice how you have Ekwesh and Ekwesh on 2 of these 3 lists, and then you have Denyen, Denyen, and Denyen on 3 out of these 4 lists, but you don't have Ekwesh and Denyen together. Because the Ekwesh are the Achaeans, and the Denyen are the Danites, or the Danoi, okay? But when you get to Homer's Iliad, which is going to be written in the 8th century, so 400 plus years after this, they say that the 2 main names that the Greeks are called, sometimes they're called Hellenes, which is based on Ilios, that was another name for Troy. And then Hellenes is like a transliteration from that, and that's why they make up the story of Helen of Troy. And then sometimes they're called Achaeans, and sometimes they're called Danans or Danoi. The Greeks are Danites who married in with sons of Javan to become the Achiyawa, the brethrens of Yahweh, the brethrens of Yavin. In other words, they're married in with them, so they're called the brethrens of Yavin, also known to the Egyptians as the Denyen. The reason why you see Ekwesh disappear from these lists, and then by Ramses III, the Denyen appear in the list, is simple. Here, they're getting reports on what these people are named from the Hittites, because they're going to go fight with the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, but it's going to be a stalemate, and they're going to stop with a treaty, okay? These 2 very powerful kingdoms are being drawn into war with each other by the Jews to destroy each other, okay? And they figure it out. They figure out what's going on here. And they figure out that the Ekwesh, or the Achaeans, are the Denyan. The same people they just kicked out of Avaris, they're also up in Greece. And they're tearing down both of their kingdoms. And so what the Egyptians are going to do, notice this period, it's going to be from, this is going to be like 2070 to around 1100. They're going to go consolidate up in North Egypt, and they're going to subjugate the people of Cush and Nubia, and they're going to build up their forces for about a century, and then they're going to go drive the Danites out. They're not going to mess with them for like 100 years, and then they're going to go drive them out. And by the time they drive them out, they're going to record it in Manetho. They're going to record where they came from and how they drove them out under Ramses finally, and then it's going to be in the Kadesh inscription. So check this out. I actually have the Kadesh inscription in English. Here they mention the different sea peoples are with them. Dardani. It says enumeration of the chiefs of the Lamb of Hatti. So that's the Hittites. And His Majesty brought living prisoners in the house of his father Ammon. Dardani, Pedasa, I don't know who that is, Karkisha, Massa, and Luca. So I know that's Lycia. So the Dardani are the Denyan, and then Luca. Here he says, the wretched chief of Caleb, being emptied of water by his soldiers after His Majesty had thrown him into the water. So he's mentioning the chief of Caleb. Okay, so the Calebites, that's what the people of Hebron, the Judahites of Hebron, would have been. Their tribal chieftain of the three main tribes of Judah are the Calebi, the I think they're Ram, Aminadab, and Caleb, I believe, are the three guys, or Hezron might be one of them. So like Hezron, Aminadab, and Caleb, I think, are the three brothers, or Jeroboam. I forget what the name is, but Caleb's one of them. Actually, let's look at that. Sons of Pharez, Hezron, Hamul, the sons of Zerah, Zimri, Ethan, Calcol, blah, blah, blah. The sons of Hezron, I'm sorry. So it's the sons of Hezron, who is the firstborn of Pharez, who, this is where the line of David comes from, are Jeremiel, Ram, and Calebi. Those are the main guys. And then Caleb, who is with Joshua, is descended from this Caleb. He's all the way down here, where he talks about Caleb, the brother of Jeremiel, were born, the firstborn this, blah, blah, blah. Marishah, the father of Hebron. And then he says, in Ephah, Caleb's concubine, Baram, Haran, and Moza, and Gezez, and Haran, bat Gezez. And then it says Caleb's Makah, Caleb's concubine, Baram, Sheber, Tira, and she bare Shaph, the father of Madma, Shiva, the father of Machma, the father of Gibeah, and the daughter of Caleb was Aksha. Aksha is the daughter that he marries to Othniel for taking the city of Kiriath Arba. And these are the sons of Caleb, the son of Hur, the firstborn of Ephrathah, Jobal, the father of Kiriath Jearim. So Caleb is a major name among them. Caleb is basically who their tribe is called, these Judahites of Hebron. The camp of His Majesty's army was pitched there. He's talking about Kadesh. His Majesty took the seat on the throne of gold to the north side of Kadesh and the right side of the Orontes. So the Orontes River is the river that's north of, or just north or just south of Kadesh, so it's just above Lebanon, basically. This is actually the river that the Jews are trying to take right now from southern Lebanon as basically a border, because that's where Hezbollah is based. So here's the Orontes River. There's Homs, Syria. Because remember, the Jews used to control all the way up to the Euphrates River up here. And there's Lebanon. And Kadesh is up here north of Homs. So he says, then came a scout who was with the suite of His Majesty, bringing 2 scouts belonging to the fallen one of Kadesh. Okay? They were introduced into his presence. Then the Majesty said to them, what are ye? And he says, we belong to the chief of Hatti. So the Hittites, okay? He it is who sent us to spy out where His Majesty is. And His Majesty said to him, where is he himself, the fallen one of Hatti? Behold, I have heard that he is in the land of Caleb to the north of Tunip. So there's apparently Calebites who are up north here with the Danites. And he says, and they said to His Majesty, see, the wretched chief of Hatti has come together with many foreign countries that are with him. whom he has brought with him as allies, the land of Dardani. So that's the Danites, the land of the dwelling of the Danites. Okay, so it's basically what they call their colonies. The land of Nahrin, those are the Nahorites of Aram, and Keshes and those of Massa. I don't know exactly who those are. Those of Padasa, those of Karkisha and Luka, the land of Carchemish, the land of Arzawa. The land of Arzawa goes all the way out to western Turkey, which is near Dardania. Luka is in Lycia, the land of Ugarit, the land of Arwin, the land of Inessa, the land of Mushanet, Kadesh, Caleb, and the entire land of Kenny. They are furnished with their infantry and their chariots, carrying their weapons by warfare, and they are more numerous than the sand of the riverbank. See, they are equipped and ready to fight behind Kadesh the Old. So what is he saying? All of these people, these are people the Hittites have gathered as allies from western Anatolia all the way down to Judah, it seems like. And they're all gathered to fight Ramses II. Well, the reason is he's been driving the Jews and the Danites out of Avaris, and now they're pushed back to the point where they're in Hittite territory. And the Hittites are going to be like, well, let's all fight them and push them back. And my enemy's enemy is my friend. These guys are like, bet, let's do this. And so he's like, and I beat them all. Well, he didn't beat them all. It was a standstill because they had a ton of allies with them. But again, these Jews and these Danites, they will fight for you and against you. A lot of these guys will do this because it's about protecting their homelands. And yeah, we'll fight with you against our common enemy in Egypt, and they'll do that. So I am of the opinion, and unless somebody can come up with a different people who are Caleb, but we're like the Naharin or the Nahorites. There's the Ram Naharin, the Dardani are the Danites, and the Caleb are the Judahites. Caleb are the Judahites. So that's it. That's what I got. Again, I'm composing this all into a history. I'm getting into now the Greek gods and how they're etymologically rooted in Hebrew words because the Greeks didn't have a written language. And they're writing down in Greek words and Greek kind of spelling conventions the different names for what the Danites call God. The Romans are going to be like Jove, Jehovah. They're going to be like Idoneus, Adonius, Hades, Adoni, my Lord, Us. Zeus is just generic for God. Poseidon means Posis of Dan. It's the Lord of Dan. Those are their main gods, and they're going to keep growing. And some of them are borrowed from, you can tell they're gods that come from the Hittites, and they come from the, Sumerians and all this stuff that traveled from the Near East, because these guys are going to be mixed with other Japhethites. It's not like the Greeks are in isolation and they're not talking to other Japhethites. They are too. But most of the Japhethite gods come from the Middle East. They don't invent a bunch of their own gods. They basically have Zeus or Deus, which is basically their generic term for the shining one or the divine one or the heavenly one. And then they're going to be all, because they have horses, they're going to be all around here. You can have this big empire, but you're not going to control all the outskirts and all the seas. And so they're going to be able to ship by seas, and they're going to be able to run by horses, and they're going to be able to travel between here and trade horses. This is a very big deal for these guys to get their hands on horses. And out of that horse trading is going to turn to their exchanging of different gods and stuff like this. And also out of the tin trade, the bronze trade. Because tin comes from Afghanistan, and it comes from the West, and this is where all these guys here get it. So, again, when you understand the history, and you understand the etymology, and you understand the trade routes of these ancient eras, it's not terribly difficult to put these things together. But what you're always going to find is these tiny little details in the Bible turn out to be true. And what we know from Scripture by 3 witnesses is that Goshen was taken by Joshua along with all of Judea and Gaza and all this other stuff, and it was given to the Judahites in the division of the lands. That lines up perfectly with what Manetho says about them coming back with the Jews that had been expelled under Amen. It says Amenosis or Amenhotep, which seems to be Amenhotep III. Seems to be the same person. So Amenhotep, or it might be Amenhotep II. Amenhotep II might be the pharaoh of the Exodus. I might be getting him mixed up with Thutmose. I'll have to double check that when I'm doing the Egyptian period. I do know that there are other Christian scholars that believe it's Amenhotep II, so I'm going to have to check their rationale and see if I'm wrong and change it before I get to this. But the point is, in the period immediately after that of the Judges, Othniel beating the Kassites is a big deal. And then the Danites kicking the Philistines out of Crete and overthrowing basically the whole Aegean is a huge deal, because they're going to be central to the overthrow of Troy and Hattusa in 1180, and that essentially is going to cement the Bronze Age collapse. You do not have a unified trade anymore among Anatolia. You do not have a link between Anatolia all the way out to the tin mines of Cornwall in Spain. And then you are introducing iron because the Philistines are forced to do it. And so you already have an overthrow of Egypt. You have an overthrow of the Hittites. You have a defeat of the Kassites, so they're on the decline, and in their place is going to rise up the Assyrians eventually. And then you have an end of the Mitanni, and then you have the end of the Minoans. And so people look at all this, and the last thing they're going to tell you is that this great people called the Israelites came out of Egypt and just started kicking everyone's butt. They don't want you to believe that. And so they're going to come up with, there must have been a ton of famines and volcanoes that just caused all this stuff to happen. Here's some evidence of some ash somewhere. Not saying there were no volcanoes and no famines, but I'm sorry, but volcanoes and famines do not cause entire civilizations to disappear. War does. It's the only thing that causes civilizations to disappear. War and other people taking over their trade routes. That's it. Otherwise, why would their civilization disappear? A volcano and a famine. No. The reason the Cretan civilization and the Cilicians and the Sardinians and all this stuff got overhauled is because they're an island. And guess what you don't have a ton of on an island? Food. Yeah, you can fish, but you can't grow tons of wheat and stuff like that. You're on an island. You don't have a lot of farmland. And so they're going to master trade of different things and craftsmanship, but they're going to need food and stuff like that imported. And that civilization is going to fall apart when they stop being the bronze suppliers to the Egyptians. That's what happens. And then it's the same thing with the Trojans. They're going to fall apart when they stop being the tin suppliers to the Hittites. Once Troy is destroyed the second time, it never gets rebuilt to its former glory because its glory was based around them being the main import hub of tin to the Hittites. Think about this. This is a crucial mineral for their weapons trade. It's so huge. You understand the tin trade? It's going to radically change how you view the ancient Near East. These guys, the Tajeker, they go inhabit the city of Dor. The Peliset, obviously, they're going to occupy Gaza. These people are just going to pile up, mostly in Gaza, and that's why you have Dagon. Remember, Dagon is not originally a Philistine god. People are like, we don't believe the Bible because it says they worship Dagon, and there's no way they worship Dagon. No, because Dagon is a Syrian god, and he's worshipped at Mari and Amar. Well, guess what? Mari and Amar get wiped out by the Danites too because they're right in the Hittite territory, or they're right in the southern Hittite territory by Ugarit and all this. These are all Amorite states that are basically in. Let's look at them. Mari's way over here. I'm sorry, the Danites don't overthrow Mari. Amar is up here, closer to Carchemish. And then there's another one. Ugarit. Right here, where Dagon is worshipped, because these are all Amorite territories. And Dagon was basically a great king before the flood in Mari. Okay? And so the Amorites, when they get kicked out of Babylon, when they're in Babylon, their high god is going to be Marduk, and they're kind of mixing with Enlil and these other gods here. But when they get kicked out, they have a new pantheon, which is going to be based on Baal being the son of Dagon. Okay, and here in Ugarit, they call him the father of Baal El, but in Mari they call him Dagon. Baal Hadad is Dagon, so El is the generic for God. The name they give him is Dagon. Well, the Danites are going to sack Byblos and Ugarit and other cities here. Well, where are they going to go when they get sacked? They're going to go to the one place that is a stronghold against the Jews and the Danites, and that's the Philistines. And so the priesthood from Ugarit goes to Philistia, because the Egyptians or the Hittites are falling apart. It also says they had a trade and diplomatic relations with Elisha. That gets taken over by the Danites, so they can't go there. It also says that they had pottery from the Mycenaeans. That gets taken over from the Danites, so they can't go there. So where are they going to go? It says Ugarit was associated with the Semitic-speaking kingdom of Yamhad, because these are Arameans who are ruled by Amorites. Centered near Aleppo in northern Syria, Ugarit is mentioned in the cache of tablets in Akkadian cuneiform, was recovered from the ancient Sumerian Amorite city-state of Mari in the upper Euphrates, dated the 1800s. So that's when the 1800 BCE, this is around the time of Abraham, is when they first get note of this. Abraham and Isaac, 1700 is when they go into Egypt. Ugarit had contacts with the Egyptian kingdom. An artifact of carnelian inscribed with the name of Senuseret I, which is an Egyptian pharaoh, and that's how we know when they had contact with them. The stela and the statuette of the Egyptian pharaoh Senuseret and Amenemhat, these are based on Amen or Ham and Sen. So Senuseret means Sen is great, Amenemhat means Amen is pleased, have also been recovered. It is unclear what these objects brought to Ugarit. And then it says the city reached its golden age between 1500 and 1200 BC. Well, what's going on in that time? This is the time between the Jews being captive in Egypt and the Danites coming out, kicking butt and taking names all over Lebanon and Syria. Coastal Syria, the sea peoples. The mercantile coastal kings trading with Egypt, the Cyprus, and the Aegean states, primarily Minoan Crete, which gets overthrown by the Danites. Polities in Syria, the Hittites, cities of the Lebanon, including Ashkelon and Canaan. Ashkelon. That's the city of the Philistines. This is where Samson goes and kills 30 guys to go get their clothes or whatever for the riddle. And much of the eastern Mediterranean, this is also where Mopsus is going to launch an attack on this around the time of Samson's life. 5 of the Egyptian Amanra letters from the 14th century BCE were written in Ugarit. The population of Ugarit in this period consisted of 7,000 to 8,000 individuals. The kingdom of Ugarit controlled 2,000 kilometers. So that's a big kingdom. It's controlling 2,000 square kilometers. So imagine be like 40 kilometers by 50 kilometers, okay? 2,000 people, 7,000, 8,000 people, that's nothing to the Danites. That's total people. And you probably have maybe 1,000 fighting men among them, tops. And the Danites are like, yeah, we're 65,000 strong fighting men. So we're going to take that out, lickety-split. Also, the Asherites are with them, and the Naphtalites are with them. It says they were ruled by a Mataru. Notice this is 1388. 1386 is when Joshua dies, okay? So it says they were ruled by Amataru. The letter was sent by him probably to Pharaoh Amenhotep III. Expresses cordial diplomatic relations between the two. During the reign of his son Nikmadu, 1300 to 1315, Ugarit became the vassal of the Hittites, first under the viceroy of Carchemish. So that is going to be a Hittite, basically city-state at this time. They took it. It's no longer Egyptian. And then with the Hittite collapse directly under Carchemish, diplomatic relations with Egypt continued, as evidenced by the 2 letters sent by Nicomedu II and his wife Heba, probably sent to Akhenaten, which is going to be the guy who's starting the monotheistic cult. And then the former includes a request from the Egyptian king to send a physician to Ugarit. And then it says from the 13th century to the early 12th century BC. So just so you know, the early 12th century BC is going to be right when Deborah and Barak are fighting. Okay, it's going to be 11. I think it's going to be 1190. The eastern Mediterranean faced severe and widespread food shortages. It's not food shortages. It's the Israelites taking all their food. Just like the Midianites came through and took all the stored grain and stuff like that from the Israelites when they had them on the down, the Israelites are doing the same thing to their enemies. Remember, they're supposed to drive them out and wipe them out. They're taking their food. From crop failures due to plant disease. There might have been some of this, but no. The kings of Ugarit, a major supplier and transporter of foodstuffs, received a number of desperate pleas for food from neighboring states. Remember, these inland seas would ship out food to Cyprus and Crete and stuff like this in exchange for their wares. Okay? So these people on the islands would mostly make stuff out of metal and some other artistic stuff, and they would trade it for food. Because you can only eat so much fish and oysters. Eventually, Ugarit itself faced food shortage and hunger. The letter from the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah, 1213 to 1203, referred to a message sent by the ruler of Ugarit. So you had written me, could I not have demanded my needs from the great king, the king of Egypt, my lord? I demand this request in the land of Ugarit. There's severe hunger. Biruru Danis. May my lord save Ugarit. I'm sorry, but this is Hebrew Danites. In the land of Ugarit, there is severe hunger. Biru Danis. They translate this. The word they're like, the word Biru means bright, shining copper. Danis means strong exceedingly. No, it's Hebrew Danites. I'm sorry. In the land of Ugarit, there is Hebrew Danites. May the Lord save the land of Ugarit, and may the king give grain to save my life and to save the citizens of the land of Ugarit. So the Danites might be taking all of their food, because this is not long after the Amonra period where they're taken over. The last king of Ugarit, Amurabi, that's another way of saying Hammurabi, was a contemporary of the last known Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II. Near the Amurabi stresses in 1180 is when the Hattusa is going to fall and when Troy is going to fall. Stresses the seriousness of the crisis faced by the Near Eastern status due to attacks from outsiders, the Sea Peoples. I'm sorry, but that seems like Hebrew Danites. And this seems like Sea Peoples, which include the Hebrew Danites. Ugarit's army, remember, this is 1215, this is 1213. See how close this is? Ugarit's army and navy joined with Hittite forces to stem the oncoming enemy. The allies eventually had to fall back from Anatolia to the Syrian frontier. Hammurabi's response to the king of Elisha's appeal for assistance. Remember, around this time, they're going to have Mopsus. No, I'm sorry, this is going to be before this. So they're going to have the island of Adana make all these ships to invade Elisha. Appeal for assistance from highlights in the desperate situation in Ugarit across the eastern Mediterranean. My father, behold, enemy ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that my troops and my chariots are in the land of Hatti, and my ships in the land of Luca? In other words, Lycia. This is where some of the sea people are coming from. They're fighting against them. And his chariots are fighting the Hittites. Why? Because the Hittite kingdom is falling now. That's why, and they're a vassal of them. So now they're falling to the Danites because they're busy fighting the other Danites on the other side of the Hittites who are with the Greeks helping overthrow Hattusa. The country is abandoned to itself. My father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. So since the 7 ships of the enemy came there, 7 ships times 50 guys is 350 guys. Well, we know the Danites can do a lot of damage with 300 guys, right? Eshuwara, the senior governor of Elisha, responded, as for the matter concerning those enemies, it was the people of your country and your own ships who did this. It was the people from your country who committed these transgressions. I am writing you to inform and protect you. Be aware. Listen to this. This is the governor of Cyprus is telling, he's telling Ugarit, remember, they're surrounded by Danites and Asherites, okay? He's saying, as for concerning those enemies, it was the people from your country and your own ships who did this. It was the people from your country who committed these transgressions. I'm writing to inform you and protect you. Beware. Cyprus is literally telling them, we're getting overthrown by the people who come from your land. This is so obvious. At the end, Hammurabi begged for forces from the Hittite Viceroy at Carchemish. The invaders had captured the kingdoms, another port, Rasu, and were advancing on the city of Ugarit. To the king, my lord, say, thus Hammurabi, your servant, I wrote you twice, thrice, now regarding the enemy. May my lord know that the enemy forces are stationed at Rasu, and the avant-garde forces were sent to Ugarit. Now may my lord send me forces and chariots, that the Lord may save me from the forces of the enemy. Viceroy sent troops to assist Ugarit, but Ugarit had already been sacked, and the Hittite forces reached the city. The letter written to the viceroy after the destruction said, when your messenger arrived, the army was humiliated, and the city was sacked. Our food on the threshing floors was burnt, and the vineyards also destroyed. Our city is sacked. May you know it. May you know it. In other words, you didn't help us out. You guys suck. We're all getting our butts kicked by these, weird guys named Buru Danis, Hebrew Danites. Come on. Early in the excavation of the text, the Ugarit king list and the Ugarit was found. Complete renditions of Akkadian were discovered, and the last 26 rulers all deified. Only the last rulers are supported in the text are synchronisms. Given that Ugarit was abandoned between the Middle and Late Bronze Ages, it is thought that the earliest names on the list were the order of tribal chieftain kings. Okay, so here's this whole period. Remember, Joshua enters the land in 1386. 1350, known in the damage seal that says, Yekarim, son of blah 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 of Ugarit, contemporary of Supelina, and this is when they start having all these problems. Finally, Ugarit is destroyed by 1200. So basically between the time of Joshua and the time of Deborah, that's when they get destroyed. Joshua's going to die 36 years before this, so we're roughly around the days of Othniel. And then after that, you're going to have Ehud, and 80 years of peace after Ehud, and then you're going to have Deborah and Barak around 1200 BC get together and go fight the Canaanites at Hazor. And in between this, what are the Danites and the Naphtalites and the Asherites doing? Well, Deborah's telling you what they're doing. They're on their ships and their breaches. And what are these guys telling you they're doing? We're being invaded by Hebrew Danites. We're being taken over by them, and so is Cyprus. And apparently everybody in the Eastern Mediterranean is getting overthrown by these guys. You have like this orgy of evidence that the Danites overthrew everything in the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, everything in the coastal areas of the Eastern Mediterranean. From Egypt to Crete to Greece to Cyprus to southern Turkey to western Turkey and all the way over to the tin sources. And they sailed all up and down the rivers. So the idea that these people are just going to do all that and then just disappear and be like, oh, we're going to settle in and just become, goat herders in Greece. No, they kept going. They kept doing what they were doing. They kept starting new colonies. They kept mastering trade routes. They kept exploring and pioneering. They discovered the New World. And at the end of it, when they sack Ugarit, Dagon, who is part of Ugarit, who's appealing to the Egyptians for help, like where are they going to go? The Hittites are falling apart. The Danites are all around them. Where are they going to go when they escape the city? And the answer is, well, they've got some ships, because Ugarit is actually a port colony. I mean, the city of Ugarit I don't think is on the sea, but they've got ports, and so where are they going to go? Well, they can't sail here. The Danites control that. They can't sail here. The Danites control that. They're going to go to the place where the Danites don't control, and that's the Philistines. And they're going to take Dagon with them. And that's how Dagon becomes a Philistine god. Remember, the Philistines are a mixed people. They're primarily the Philistines that came from Caphtor. They're descendants of Chalsuhim that come from Caphtor. That's the main people, but they're going to be mixed in with all these other people who are displaced by the Danites. And this kingdom becomes the main rival of the Jews from the time of basically Deborah and Barak forward. And so by the time you get to Jephthah, which is going to be, I believe, Judges 10. Jephthah is going to be around 1106. Okay, remember, they've destroyed in 1180, they've destroyed Troy. Hattusa sacked. And then Jephthah, it's going to say in the beginning of his age, they're given over to the Ammonites in the east and the Philistines in the west. And Jephthah doesn't deliver them from the Philistines. Samson's going to be dealing with the Philistines around this same time. And we have Samson down here, and I haven't really totally figured out where to place him. But based on what I see, he's either right before or right after Jephthah. So you're looking at Samson as around the 1100s. And Hercules seems to be based on Samson, but you're not going to be able to place Samson in the timeline of where they say Hercules is with the siege of Troy and all that stuff. He just doesn't fit anywhere there. But he does seem to spend 20 unaccounted years getting involved with what the Danites are doing. And that could involve Mopsus's invasion of Ashkelon. It doesn't say, but it doesn't seem like Samson is doing tons of warfare outside of what you see in the Bible. And the reason is because when he kills the Philistines in the temple, it says he kills more men in the temple than he did in his life, and he kills 3,000 men in the temple. Which means if he's killed 1,000 guys with the jawbone of a donkey, the most people he could have killed in the rest of his adventures is 2,000. Which could involve him getting involved in wars and doing this other stuff. But he's not going to be responsible for great feats and leading campaigns, because otherwise he would have killed a lot more people that they would have noted. The biggest thing he did was destroying these people in the temples, and the Pillars of Hercules is based on Samson destroying the Philistines in the temple. So I haven't done all that research in writing yet, but I will. That's going to be in the book Serpent by the Way. In the meantime, you guys, I think, can take to the bank that the Israelites reoccupied Avaris and Goshen. You're going to talk, if you guys have access to the guys at Expedition Bible and guys like David Roll and other guys who are into ancient history and stuff like that, start pressing them and be like, what about this in Manetho? Because remember, that's in Manethos Aegyptica. And this in Joshua saying they retook Goshen. Are you factoring that into your archaeological history telling, basically? Because I haven't heard anyone else doing that. I just discovered this in this research, and I wanted to share it with you guys because you're so awesome. So anyways, hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope you are enjoying this. I'm going to get into more Christian nationalism, hopefully by the end of the week, and we'll start talking about the Freemasons and the Scottish Presbyterians, and then the Northern English Puritans, and then the sack of King Charles and basically the line of King James, and the King James Bible and the Geneva Bible and all this stuff, and the essentially the sedition that becomes normalized in Calvinist Christian nationalism. And then after that, we'll get into America. Okay? So I hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.